Let go of me." The words came out before Emily Carter could stop them. Barely a whisper, but loud enough to freeze the entire room. The man gripping her wrist laughed. He thought she was nothing. He thought she had nowhere to go and no one coming for her. He was wrong. From the shadows at the back of the bar, someone was already watching. Before we go any further, if this story already has your heart racing, please subscribe to our channel and follow Emily's journey all the way to the end. Drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. She counted the money 3 times. $41, 3/4. A dime, with a scratch across Roosevelt's face that she had been staring at for so long, she felt like she knew him personally. Emily Carter sat on the edge of a bus station bench at 2 in the morning, her worn canvas suitcase wedged between her ankles. Her coat pulled tight against a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. She had been on 3 different buses over the last 18 hours. She had eaten half a granola bar somewhere in the middle stretch and told herself she wasn't hungry, which was a lie, but it was a lie she had gotten very good at telling. Ravenport. She had picked the name off a map the same way a desperate person spins a bottle just pointed and prayed for something far enough away that he would never bother to follow. She didn't know a single person in this city. She didn't have a plan beyond the next 12 hours. She didn't even have a real name anymore. The bus ticket said Rachel Moore, which was the name on the library card she had found tucked inside a paperback at the Greyhound station in Columbus. She had held that card for a long time before slipping it into her pocket. A borrowed identity for a borrowed life. Her real name was Emily Carter, 29 years old. Originally from a small town in Indiana where everyone knew everyone else's business and nobody had known hers. Nobody had known that the man she lived with for 2 years had been quietly, systematically, and very deliberately taking her apart from the inside. It didn't happen all at once. That was the thing people never understood when she tried to explain it the few times she had tried to explain it, which were not many, because explaining it meant watching someone's face change from sympathy to confusion. That particular confusion that said, "But why didn't you just leave?" as if leaving were a door you could simply walk through whenever you felt like it, rather than a wall you had been convinced didn't exist. Daniel Cross had been charming in the beginning. That was always how people like him started. He had been funny and attentive and magnetic, the kind of man who made you feel chosen, specifically and deliberately chosen, like out of every woman in every room, he had looked at you and decided you were worth something. Emily had grown up feeling like the girl who blended into backgrounds, the quiet daughter of a quiet family, never quite enough of anything to be remarkable. And then Daniel looked at her like she was remarkable, and she had made the mistake that 1,000 women before her had made. She believed him. The changes came slowly. First, it was small things. He didn't like her friend. Carla thought Carla was a bad influence, dramatic and selfish, and not the kind of person Emily needed around her. And Emily had looked at Carla through Daniel's eyes for a while, and eventually she had pulled back, not dramatically, not in a way that felt like a choice being made for her, just gradually, the way winter comes, and one day she looked up and Carla was gone. Then it was her job. He didn't ask her to quit exactly. He just found problems with it every single day. Her boss was taking advantage of her. Her coworkers were toxic. She was too smart for that work, and it was draining her. He made every day at the office feel like a battle before she even left the house, so that eventually the path of least resistance was the path he had already cleared for her. Then it was the money. He managed it better, he said. She wasn't good with numbers, he said. It was just easier this way, he said. And she had given him her account information and her paycheck and her financial independence, and she had told herself it was a partnership. By the time she understood it wasn't a partnership, she didn't have access to a single dollar that he didn't give her permission to spend. And then came the words. That was the part nobody ever talked about, Emily thought. The words. The slow, patient daily work of convincing someone that what they see in the mirror is not worth looking at. Daniel never hit her. She knew how that sentence sounded, even as she thought it knew that people held it up like it meant something good, like the absence of physical bruises, proved a certain minimum of damage. But he had said things to her over 2 years that had settled into her bones like lead, dense and heavy, and permanent things that she heard in his voice even when he wasn't in the room. Things she still heard now on the bus to nowhere at 2 in the morning in a city she had never seen before. "You're not smart enough to do this without me. You'd fall apart in a week on your own. Who else is going to want you after everything you've put me through? You don't even know how good you have it." She had started to believe them. That was the part that still made her sick, that she had started to believe them. Not all at once, not in a way she could point to and say, "That was the day I gave up," but gradually, the same way everything with Daniel happened, until the belief was just part of the furniture, part of the air in the apartment, just the way things were. The night she left, it wasn't because she had finally found her courage. She needed to be honest about that. It was because she had found his phone unlocked on the kitchen counter, and she had seen a message from a woman she didn't know. And in the message, this woman said, "I told her yet," and Daniel had written back, "Why would I? She's not going anywhere." Emily had stood in the kitchen in her socks, reading that message 3 times. And then she had taken her coat off the hook and her wallet from the drawer, and her emergency 20 from behind the picture frame in the hallway, the one emergency resource she had hidden from him, a single small act of defiance she had managed to maintain, and she had walked out the door. She did not take her keys. She did not take her phone. She left her phone on purpose because she knew he had ways of tracking it, and she was not going to make the mistake of being findable. She had walked to the bus station. She had bought a ticket to the first place on the board that was far enough away. And now she was here on this bench with $41 and some change, and a borrowed name, and for the first time in 2 years, the only person controlling her next move was her. She didn't feel free. She felt terrified. But she picked up her suitcase and she stood up, because terror was at least honest, and honest was somewhere to start. She found work the hard way, which was the only way left to her. She didn't have a real ID she wanted to use. She didn't have a phone with references in it. She didn't have a laptop or a resume or a clean address to put on an application. What she had was her face and her hands, and 23 years of watching her mother work double shifts at a diner, which meant she knew how to carry 4 plates at a time without looking down, and how to smile at a man who'd had one too many, in a way that diffused the situation before it became one. The first 2 places turned her away before she got 3 sentences out. The third place, a sandwich shop near the bus station, let her fill out an application, and then the manager looked at the gaps in her work history, and the look on his face closed like a window before he said he'd call her. He didn't call her. She walked for most of that first day. She kept her suitcase close and her eyes moving, and she ate a cup of instant soup from a corner store, where the woman behind the counter looked at her long enough to see something, though she didn't say what she saw. Emily thanked her and left and kept walking. Ravenport was the kind of city that had once been something else. You could feel it in the architecture, the wide commercial streets that used to be full of things and now had gaps like missing teeth. Old industrial buildings with new graffiti over older graffiti neighborhoods that were either coming back or giving up, and it was hard to tell which was which from the outside. There were parts of it that had money, she could see that too. The glass towers near the waterfront. The restaurants with menus in the windows that she didn't stop to read, because stopping to read them felt like cruelty. She stayed in the middle. On the second day, she was running out of options and beginning to calculate what $41 actually meant in terms of nights in this city, which was not many. And she was trying to stay calm about that calculation, and not succeeding very well, when she turned a corner into a block that looked like it had been forgotten by whatever urban renewal had been applied to the rest of the neighborhood. Between a boarded-up pawn shop and a building that might have been a laundromat in a previous life, there was a bar. It was old. Not run down exactly, but settled, the kind of place that had been in the same spot for so long, it had become part of the street's skeleton. A sign above the door, black paint on wood, the letters careful and old-fashioned. The Black Rose. Below the name, a smaller sign, Help Wanted Nights. Emily stood on the sidewalk and looked at that sign for a long time. Something about the place made the skin on the back of her neck tighten, A faint intuition. She couldn't name the way certain doors feel different from others before you open them, like the air around them carries information. She had learned over 2 years of ignoring her own instincts that her instincts were usually right, and she should listen to them. But she had $41. She pushed open the door. The inside of the Black Rose was the kind of dark that took a moment to adjust to not pitch black, just low amber lit, the light coming from fixtures along the walls that had been there long enough to have settled into exactly the right warmth. The bar itself ran along the left wall, long and polished, the bottles behind it, arranged with a precision that suggested someone who cared about order. There were tables scattered across the floor, none of them matching, all of them solid, the kind of furniture that belonged to a place rather than having been bought to fill it. It was early afternoon, and the bar was nearly empty. A man at the far end of the counter with a newspaper and a glass of something amber. A woman behind the bar, dark-haired, somewhere in her 30s, quick-eyed, wiping down the counter with the efficiency of someone who had been doing it long enough that her hands worked independently of her attention. Emily walked up to the bar. "I saw the sign," she said. "About the position." The woman behind the bar looked at her with the flat, assessing gaze of someone who had spent a significant portion of her adult life reading people across a counter. "Experience," she said. "4 years waitressing. 2 of them in a bar." Not entirely true. The bar part was 1 year, and the waitressing had been at her aunt's diner when she was in high school, but the fundamental skills were the same, and she was not in a position to be scrupulous. References. Emily had been ready for this one. "I had to leave my last position quickly. Personal situation. I can't give you anyone to call right now, but I can work a trial shift today, if that helps. You can tell me at the end of it whether I'm worth keeping." The woman looked at her for another long moment. "Wait here," she said. She disappeared through a door at the back of the bar. Emily stood at the counter and breathed. She pressed her palms flat against the bar surface and felt the wood solid and real, and told herself to stay calm. Told herself the worst they could say was no, and no wasn't the end of anything. No just meant she walked back out and kept looking. She was still telling herself this when the door at the back of the bar opened again. The woman came back first. Behind her, a man. Emily's first impression of Adrian Voss was not what she would have expected looking back on it later. She had been bracing herself for something she wasn't sure what exactly, just some quality in the bar's atmosphere that had suggested the person in charge of it would be a certain type. She expected big and loud, or possibly slick and dismissive, the standard male bar owner energy she had encountered before in the profession. Adrian Voss was none of those things. He was tall. Genuinely tall. Not the kind of tall that requires reminding, just the kind that you simply noticed, with dark hair going slightly silver at the temples, and a face that had the quality of having been through things and come out the other side with all the softness deliberately removed. His eyes were a particular shade of dark gray that didn't so much watch you as catalog you, the way a person catalogs a situation before deciding how to handle it. He was wearing a suit, not a loud suit, just a good one, the kind worn by a man who had stopped thinking about clothes a long time ago and had simply found what worked and kept wearing it. He stood with a stillness that Emily recognized immediately. She had learned to recognize that kind of stillness in the last 2 years. The particular quality of stillness that belongs to a person who is completely comfortable with how much space they take up in a room, who has never once had to wonder whether they were safe. It could mean different things in different people. In Daniel, it had been the stillness of a man who knew he had the upper hand. In this man, it was something different. She couldn't name the difference yet, but she felt it. He looked at her the way the woman had, assessing, measuring, but with an additional quality she couldn't immediately identify. Not dismissal, not interest in the way she usually encountered it from men behind bars. Something more like recognition, though that made no sense because he had never seen her before. "What's your name?" he said. His voice was low. Not soft low. The kind of voice that doesn't need volume because the room naturally quiets to accommodate it. "Rachel," she said. The borrowed name sat strangely in her mouth, but she held it. "Rachel." He said it without inflection, as if testing its weight. "Where are you from, Rachel?" "Ohio," she said, which was close enough to the truth in terms of direction, if not specifics. "Why Ravenport?" "I needed a change." He was quiet for a moment. Not an uncomfortable silence, a deliberate one, the kind of silence a person uses to give you the opportunity to fill it to see what you fill it with. Emily had learned about silences from Daniel, who used them as weapons, as waiting rooms for her guilt, as containers for whatever accusation he was building toward. This silence felt different, cleaner, like he was genuinely curious about what she would do with it rather than trying to trap her in it. She didn't fill it. Something shifted very slightly in his expression. "Sophia says you offered a trial shift," he said. "I can start right now if you need me to." He looked at her for another moment. Then he looked at Sophia, the dark-haired woman, and something passed between them that Emily couldn't read. Not words, just the shorthand of people who have worked together long enough to communicate without them. "4 hours," he said. "We'll see how it goes." He turned and walked back through the door. Sophia Romano, Emily would learn, was the kind of person who ran on efficiency and quiet observation and 3 cups of coffee before 6 in the evening. She showed Emily the layout of the bar with the brisk economy of someone whose time was valuable, pointed out the systems, explained. The regulars, there were a handful, even this early in the evening, men who came in at the same time every day with the dedication of people who have organized their lives around small, reliable rituals, and handed her an apron with an expression that said, "Don't make me regret this." Emily didn't make her regret it. The bar started filling around 7, and by 8 it was moving at the pace Emily remembered from her waitressing days, not frantic but continuous, the rhythm of orders and deliveries, and clean glasses and full ashtrays, and the background management of a room full of people in varying states of relaxation. She had forgotten how much she liked this pace, how much she liked having something specific to do with her hands and her mind, a concrete series of tasks with clear outcomes. You put the drink in front of the person, and the person drank it. That was cause and effect in a form she could trust. She caught Sophia watching her twice in the first hour with an expression that had shifted from cautious to something closer to satisfied. She didn't see Adrian Voss again until the incident. It happened around 9:30. The man's name was Gary. She heard someone call him that, and later she would hear more about Gary from Sophia in the tight, controlled tone of someone explaining a recurring problem. He was a regular in the sense that he appeared frequently, not in the sense that he was welcome. He was somewhere in his 50s, broad through the shoulders, with the particular flavor of belligerence that comes from a man who has spent years being the largest person in most of the rooms he enters, and has made certain assumptions based on that experience. He had been at the bar for an hour before he began talking to Emily in a way that required her to respond carefully, which she did, redirecting and deflecting with the practiced ease of someone who had been managing difficult male energy in service industry settings since she was 17. But Gary was not in a careful mood tonight. He grabbed her wrist when she reached across him to pick up a glass. His grip was hard, not exploratory, not accidental, the kind of grip that is a statement. The room did one of those strange compressions that happens sometimes where a local event expands to fill available attention, and the people near them went quiet in the particular way of people who are present for something developing, but haven't decided yet whether to involve themselves. Emily felt the old paralysis move through her like cold water, the freeze response she had developed over 2 years of living with a man who used touch as control, the way her body's first instinct was to go still and wait for it to be over. But underneath the freeze, something else. Something that had been very quietly rebuilding itself over the last 48 hours of deciding to be somewhere he hadn't put her. "Let go of me," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it was level. It was hers. Gary laughed. "Relax, sweetheart," he said. "I'm just being friendly." "I said let go. Or what?" The voice that answered that question was not Emily's. It came from somewhere behind Gary, calm and low, and carrying the specific kind of quiet that makes a room hold its breath. "Or you leave," Adrian Voss said. Gary turned. The change was immediate. It was not subtle. It was the physical, visible process of a man who had been absolutely certain of his position in a situation suddenly revising that assessment at speed, the blood leaving certain parts of his face in a way that was almost medically observable. "Mr. Voss," Gary said. "Hey, I didn't—" "You're going to let go of her wrist," Adrian said. "And then you're going to put money on the bar for what you drank tonight, and then you're going to leave." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't step forward. He simply spoke in the same level tone a man uses when the outcome is not in question, and everyone in the room understands that. Gary let go of Emily's wrist. He put money on the bar. He left. The door closed behind him. Adrian looked at Emily, not with the proprietary "I handled this" energy she had braced for, not with the look that said, "You're welcome, and now you owe me." He looked at her the way you look at someone you're checking on a brief, direct assessment, asking without asking. "You all right?" he said. She was. Surprisingly, fully, almost startlingly all right. More all right than she had been the last time someone touched her without permission, which was a fact she filed away quietly because it meant something she wasn't ready to think about yet. "Yes," she said. "Thank you." He nodded once. He went back through the door. Emily stood behind the bar for a moment, breathing. Sophia across the counter raised an eyebrow. "Still want the job?" she said. "Yes," Emily said. "Good," said Sophia, "because you handled the first part of that pretty well." She worked the rest of the shift, and at the end of it, Sophia handed her cash the trial amount fare, and told her to come back tomorrow at 6. Emily took the money and held it in her hand for a moment, in a way that probably looked strange from the outside. But from the inside was the specific sensation of having done something with her own effort and been paid for it, and not having to account for it to anyone, which was a sensation she hadn't felt in 2 years, and it was so strong it almost made her dizzy. She found a room that night in a boarding house 3 blocks east of the Black Rose. Not a good room, a small room with a shared bathroom and a radiator that knocked, but it was a room and it locked from the inside, and the key was hers. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed and counted her money. She had enough for 3 nights. By the end of 3 nights, she would have been paid again. She lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling and tried to remember the last time she had made a plan that only involved herself. The last time the next move had been something she decided rather than something that was decided for her. She couldn't remember. She closed her eyes. For the first time in as long as she could remember, she slept without listening for footsteps in the hall. Tongue. The first 2 weeks at the Black Rose were the hardest and the most surprising of Emily's life since leaving Indiana. They were hard because starting over from scratch at 29 with no ID, you want to use a no phone and no network is genuinely practically grinding work, the kind that fills every available hour and leaves you too tired to feel much of anything beyond the satisfaction of crossing items off a mental list. Find work done. Find a room done. Eat something done. Don't fall apart ongoing but managing. They were surprising because of what the bar turned out to be. She had assumed in the first few days that the Black Rose was simply a bar, old independent, not particularly remarkable. She had registered the things that were slightly off about it, the way certain visitors arrived at specific hours and went straight through the back without ordering anything. The way Sophia's demeanor shifted slightly when particular people walked in, not with fear, but with a particular attentiveness that suggested elevated stakes, but she had filed these things away without examining them too closely. She was a woman who had survived 2 years by learning to not see things she wasn't supposed to see, and she had gotten very good at directing her attention elsewhere. What she understood in fragments over those first 2 weeks was this: Adrian Voss was not simply a bar owner. She picked it up the way you pick up anything you're not supposed to know, not in statements, but in texture. The way people talked to him, or more precisely, the way they waited to talk to him, the careful space they kept until he was ready to receive them. The way a conversation would happen at the back of the bar that involved men in good coats and quiet voices. And afterward, those men left, and Adrian sat alone at the bar for exactly the amount of time it took to finish a glass of water, And then he went back to whatever he had been doing before, with the exact same expression as before. No lighter, no heavier. The way Ravenport itself seemed to have a different relationship with this block, the way the city noise had a particular quality here, as if the street had made certain accommodations. She understood without anyone saying it directly. Adrian Voss ran things in Ravenport. Exactly what things and how she didn't examine too carefully. What she examined in the quiet moments between orders was the man himself. He was not what she had expected, and she had not expected anything good. The men she had known who had power, and she had known a few. Daniel being the most complete example, but there had been others before him, male relatives and employers and authority figures who understood that they had some advantage over her, and used it with varying degrees of subtlety, had used their power in a particular direction. Toward themselves. Gathering, accumulating, protecting. Taking up space and diminishing the space of others as a function of being who they were, the way certain plants need more light than what's available and don't care what grows in their shadow. Adrian Voss was powerful in a way she had not encountered before. He was powerful outward. She saw it in the way he talked to the people who worked for him. Not warmly. Exactly warmth was not the right word. He was a man who kept certain things internal and private, but with a consistent and genuine attention. A quality of actually listening when someone spoke that was rarer than it should have been, and that the people around him clearly recognized because of the way they responded to it, the way they stood a little straighter when he addressed them directly, not with fear, but with the particular alertness of someone who knows they're being actually seen. She saw it in the way he handled problems, a delivery that was wrong, a conflict between two employees about scheduling with a directness that was absolute but never cruel, never aimed at humiliation, always aimed at the situation and its resolution. She saw it in the way he was with Sophia, the ease between them, the mutual trust of people who had built something together, and knew exactly what the other was worth. He was not trying to make anyone smaller. He simply expected people to be exactly who they were. Emily found this so strange that she spent 3 days trying to figure out what the catch was. The catch she discovered on a Thursday evening was that he noticed things. She had been having a harder day than usual. Not a bad day exactly, but one of the days when the reality of her situation pushed through the busyness of the work, when the absence of her phone and her contacts and her life as it had been sat heavier than it did on better days. She had woken up in the boarding house room with the specific cold clarity of having dreamed about Daniel. Nothing dramatic, just the everyday domestic texture of those 2 years, the way certain rooms felt in that apartment. And she had spent the morning with the dream, clinging to her like fog. She had done her job. She had carried the drinks and managed the room and smiled when smiling was required. But around 8 in the evening, she turned too fast behind the bar while reaching for a bottle, and the motion must have looked different than usual, startled or abrupt, because she heard a voice from the seat nearest her end of the bar. "You okay?" She looked up. Adrian Voss was sitting at the bar. He did this occasionally, not every night, not on any schedule she had been able to identify, just appeared sometimes at the end of the bar with a glass of water, more often than anything else, and watched the room in the way a person watches something that is theirs, not possessively, but with the steady attention of ownership and care. "I'm fine," she said, the automatic answer, the answer she had given to that question for 2 years so many times that it came out before she finished deciding to say it. He looked at her, not unkindly, not with the probing quality of someone who wants more information, just honestly, as if he had asked an honest question and was waiting to see if she would answer it honestly and was perfectly comfortable waiting. "You're not fine," he said, not an accusation, just an observation. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I'm better than I was," she said. He looked at her for another moment. Then he nodded once the way he nodded when something had been settled to his satisfaction, and he turned back to the room. He didn't ask anything else. Emily stood behind the bar and felt something in her chest do something unexpected and uncomfortable, a kind of compression that had nothing to do with sadness exactly, more like the feeling of a room that has been sealed for a long time and a window has just been opened. Someone had asked her if she was okay, and when she hadn't given the easy answer he had noticed. He had simply quietly noticed. She turned back to her work and pressed the feeling down and told herself it didn't mean anything. She was wrong about that, but she didn't know it yet. It was Sophia who told her at the end of the second week without being asked and without preamble in the way Sophia did most things. "You know what this bar is?" Sophia said. It wasn't a question. Emily was restocking glasses. She kept her hand steady. "I know it's more than a bar," she said carefully. "Adrian runs the west side of Ravenport," Sophia said. "Has for 12 years. I don't mean he runs nightlife. I mean he runs the west side." Emily set a glass down on the shelf. "Okay," she said. "That doesn't bother you." "A lot of things bother me less than they used to." Sophia was quiet for a moment. She leaned against the counter with her arms crossed and looked at Emily with the assessment that Emily had learned was Sophia's version of affection, direct, unsentimental, entirely accurate. "He's a fair man," Sophia said. "That might sound like a strange thing to say about the kind of man he is, but he's fair. He doesn't harm people who don't deserve it. He doesn't use his power to take things from people who can't protect themselves. In a world like his, that's..." She paused. "That's unusual." Emily nodded. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. Sophia looked at her. "Because you're going to be here a while," she said. "And you should understand what you're inside of." She pushed off the counter and walked back toward the kitchen. Emily stood in the bar's amber light and breathed. She thought about what Sophia had said. She thought about a man who ran an empire and used it outward rather than inward. She thought about the glass of water on the end of the bar and the honest question and the space left open for her to answer truthfully. Then she went back to work because there was always work, and work was the honest thing right in front of her. She didn't let herself think about anything beyond that. Not yet. Not tonight. But somewhere in the quiet back room of herself, something that had been very still for a very long time began almost imperceptibly to move. The third week began on a Monday, and Monday was the day Emily made her first real mistake at the Black Rose. It wasn't a work mistake. Her work was clean. Sophia had told her so in the particular way Sophia gave compliments, which was by not criticizing, by simply allowing silence where criticism would have been. Emily was fast. She was accurate. She remembered drink orders without writing them down. After the second time a person ordered, and she had a quality at the bar that the better waitresses always had, and the worse ones never understood. She made people feel attended to without making them feel watched. The mistake was a different kind. The mistake was that she stopped watching the door. It happened gradually, the way dangerous relaxations always happen, not in a single moment of decision, but in the slow accumulation of safe nights. 3 weeks in Ravenport. 3 weeks without his voice on the phone. 3 weeks of keys that were hers, and money that was hers, and mornings that belonged entirely to her own calendar, and the vigilance that had kept her spine rigid for 2 years began imperceptibly to soften. She stopped sitting with her back to the wall at the boarding house. She stopped scanning faces on the street with the particular assessment of a person expecting to recognize one. She started in small ways to inhabit the present tense rather than the future threat. This was the mistake. Not because she was wrong to begin to breathe, but because she had made it before the situation that warranted it. She found out about the mistake on a Thursday afternoon before her shift when she came into the Black Rose. Through the back entrance, Sophia had given her a key at the end of the second week. An act of trust so casual and so enormous that Emily had gone back to her room and sat with the key in her palm for 10 minutes, and she found Sophia at the bar with a man Emily had not seen before. He was talking to Sophia in a low, rapid voice that had the particular energy of someone making inquiries they wanted to seem casual. He had a phone out with a photo on the screen. Sophia's face was the careful, neutral face of someone who has decided nothing yet. Emily stopped. The man's back was to her. She could see the phone screen barely, not clearly enough to know the photo, just enough to see that it was a woman's face. A cold certainty moved through her, clean and total. The way cold certainty always does, bypassing the brain entirely and speaking directly to the body. She stepped back through the door she had come in. She stood in the alley for a moment. Her heartbeat was very loud. She made herself breathe. In out slow, the way she had taught herself to breathe in the worst of the Daniel years, when breathing was the only thing she had direct control over, and she clung to it like a rope. He hadn't found her. She didn't know that for certain. She couldn't know it for certain until she knew who that man was and what was on that phone. But if he had found her, if that was Daniel's reach extending into this city where she had believed she was invisible, then she needed to think. Not panic think, because panic was the thing that got you caught and thinking was the thing that got you out. She was still standing in the alley thinking when the back door opened. Sophia looked at her. Sophia's expression was the expression of a woman who had seen a great many things and was currently looking at one more. "Come inside," Sophia said, not an order. An invitation that understood refusal wasn't actually available. Emily came inside. The man was gone. Sophia poured 2 cups of coffee. She did this without asking. Which was one of the things Emily had come to understand about Sophia, that she expressed care through action rather than inquiry, and set one in front of Emily and leaned against the back counter with her own. "Who was that?" Emily said. "Someone asking questions," Sophia said. "About a woman fitting a description." Emily wrapped her hands around the mug. "What description?" Sophia looked at her steadily. "Young brown hair traveling alone. Arrived in Ravenport approximately 3 weeks ago. Maybe using a different name." The coffee was hot. Emily held it anyway, letting it press against her palms. Something real and hot and present. "What did you tell him?" Emily said. "That I'd seen a lot of women come through here and couldn't say." "Sophia, I didn't tell him anything," Sophia said with a flatness that closed the question. "But Emily, or whatever your name actually is, I need you to understand something. A man like that asking questions in this bar is a man who doesn't know where he is. Adrian's territory, Adrian's house. And when someone comes into Adrian's house asking questions about someone inside it, that becomes Adrian's business." Emily set down the mug. "He's not going to find out," she said. "I'll be careful. I'll be more careful than I've been." "That's not how this works," Sophia said. "Sophia, please. I just need time to—" "Emily." Sophia's voice was quiet and absolute. "He already knows." Adrian was at the desk in the back office, which was a room that Emily had never been in, and had not thought about until this moment when Sophia opened the door and Emily walked through it, and was suddenly standing in the place where the actual center of things happened. The office was a working space. Papers, a laptop, 2 phones on the desk, a filing cabinet, a dry erase board along one wall, with writing on it that Emily deliberately did not read. Adrian was behind the desk. He looked up when she came in, and his expression told her he had been expecting her, which meant Sophia had sent word ahead, which meant even the last 3 minutes had been managed. She sat in the chair across from the desk without being asked, because waiting to be asked would have felt like surrendering the last piece of her own agency, and she was not doing that. "Tell me who he is," Adrian said. "Not tell me who you are, not what are you running from, not the questions that would have required her to explain herself to justify her presence to make a case for her own right to be somewhere safe. Tell me who he is." The distinction hit her somewhere she wasn't expecting. "His name is Daniel Cross," she said. "He's from Columbus. He and I were together for 2 years. She said it plainly. She had practiced in the weeks since leaving, being able to say the basic facts without the particular shame that had attached itself to them during the Daniel years, the shame he had cultivated carefully. The shame that said, "You let this happen to you," as if the letting were a choice, rather than a slow, managed erosion of every alternative. "What does he want?" Adrian said. "He wants me back," Emily said. "Not because he loves me. He doesn't love me. He wants me back because I left. And men like him don't accept that a person they've decided to own can simply decide not to be owned." Something shifted in Adrian's expression. It was very small. She almost missed it. "How long has he been looking?" he said. "I don't know. I've been careful. This is the first time I know he's close." Adrian was quiet. He looked at the desk, not at her for a moment, the particular quality of not looking that belongs to someone organizing their thoughts rather than avoiding a situation. He used the kind of investigator who asks questions in public. He said more to himself than to her. That's either arrogance or limited resources. Either way, it tells me something. Emily looked at him. "It tells you he doesn't know what he walked into." "Yes," Adrian said. He looked at her then, directly. "You're not leaving," he said. She stopped. "I wasn't planning to." "Good," he said. "Because leaving is what he expects you to do. You've been doing what he expects for 3 weeks, staying quiet, staying small, staying invisible. That's what he trained you to do." The accuracy of it landed hard enough that she had to breathe through it. "What are you suggesting instead?" she said. "I'm suggesting," Adrian said, "that you let me handle it." She looked at him for a long moment. The old warning system in her activated the one that had been built over 2 years of living with a man who also wanted to handle things for her, who also positioned himself as the solution to every problem, who had used that positioning to make her smaller and smaller until she fit exactly the size of what he needed her to be. Adrian watched her face. "I know what you're thinking," he said. "Do you? You're thinking that the last man who offered to handle things for you used the offer to take everything away from you," he said. "You're thinking that accepting help is the first step in a process you've already been through and don't intend to repeat." She didn't answer. "You're right to think that," he said. "The difference is I'm not asking to handle your life. I'm asking to handle one specific man who came into my bar and asked questions about my employee. That's not charity. That's how my world works." She sat with that for a moment. "What does that mean for me?" she said. "It means you go to work tonight," he said. "It means you stop looking over your shoulder because I'll be looking. It means you let me find out what he knows and what he doesn't know, and we go from there." "And what do you get out of it?" she said. It came out more direct than she had intended, but she didn't take it back. It was the right question. It was the question she should have been asking all along, of everyone, of every offer of anything. Adrian looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully decode, something between surprised and not surprised, the reaction of a man who has asked and answered this question about himself more than once. "A good employee," he said, "and a problem solved in my own house, which is always preferable to having problems unresolved." He looked back at the desk. The conversation was over. Emily stood up. She walked to the door and then stopped with her hand on the frame. "Daniel thinks I'm stupid," she said without turning around. "He spent 2 years convincing me of it. I need you to understand that I'm not." "I know you're not," Adrian said. Behind her, his voice was even, certain. "I've been watching you work for 3 weeks." She left. She went back out to the bar, tied on her apron, and went to work. Her hands were completely steady. He found Daniel's investigator by the end of the week. Emily knew this because Sophia told her casually in the middle of inventory, in the same tone she would have used to mention a delivery confirmation. The investigator, a man named Briggs who ran a licensed PI operation out of a strip mall in a suburb south of Ravenport, had made 2 inquiries in the city. Both had been answered with the same information: nothing here, move on. Whether those answers were the truth was beside the point. What mattered was that they were consistent. "Will Briggs tell Daniel he found nothing?" Emily said. "Briggs will tell Daniel whatever he's paid to tell him," Sophia said. "And Briggs has been encouraged to consider his options." Emily looked at her. Sophia looked back with the expression of a woman who considers her vocabulary carefully. "Encouraged," Emily said. "Appropriately," said Sophia. Emily turned back to the inventory. She had an emotion she didn't have a word for. Not gratitude exactly, or not only gratitude, something more complicated. a recognition of being protected that sat alongside a wariness of being protected. The two feelings living in adjacent rooms in her chest, neither canceling the other out. She had spent 2 years being told she was protected, being told that the control was the protection that the restriction was. Love, and her nervous system could not yet fully distinguish between the two, between the help that diminished and the help that held space. But she was learning. She was learning what the difference felt like. It felt like Sophia handing her a key at the end of the second week. It felt like Adrian saying, "You're not leaving," and meaning she didn't have to, not meaning she couldn't. It felt like being watched because someone cared whether she was all right, not because someone needed to know where she was. Here. The fourth week was when things began to change between her and Adrian in the way things change when two people who are both paying close attention to the world begin slowly to pay attention to each other. It didn't announce itself. Nothing in Adrian's life announced itself. She was beginning to understand that about him. The way he operated at a remove from the obvious. The way his movements and decisions were quiet and deliberate, and looked like something smaller than they were, until you were close enough to see them clearly. He didn't seek her out. He didn't manufacture reasons to be near her. He simply appeared periodically in the patterns of the bar's evenings at the end of the counter with his water, or in the doorway between the front room and the back, watching the room with the steady attention of a man who has never stopped being responsible for what happens inside it. And somewhere in the fourth week, she stopped trying to figure out what he was getting from these appearances, and started simply being aware of them. She was aware of them the way you are aware of a fixed point when you're navigating an unfamiliar space. Not a destination, not a need, just a reliable point of reference that allows you to know where you are. It was on a Wednesday that he spoke to her about something that wasn't business. He had been at the end of the bar for about 40 minutes, and the bar had been slow, a Tuesday night pace on a Wednesday, which happened sometimes the rhythm of the city doing something unpredictable. And she had been restocking and wiping down and letting herself exist in the comfortable quiet of a slow night, which was its own kind of pleasure. She came to his end of the counter to wipe down the bar surface. He moved his glass without being asked, which was the kind of small, unconscious courtesy that reveals more about a person than most deliberate statements. "You're from Indiana," he said. She looked up. "You said Ohio," he said. "But last week you mentioned a town that doesn't exist in Ohio." She held still for a moment. "You looked it up," she said. "I noticed the inconsistency," he said. "I looked it up to confirm." She didn't know what to do with the fact that he had caught the lie and was telling her he caught it without making anything of it, without using it, without turning it into leverage. "Yes," she said. "Indiana. Small town. Small enough that I couldn't have a bad day without half the county knowing about it by dinner." Something moved in his face, not quite a smile more. The preparation for one, the slight shift around the eyes. "Is that why you left?" he said. "I left because of Daniel," she said. She hadn't planned to say it. But it was true, and she was so tired of carrying true things carefully, of editing and managing and packaging her reality into the version that wouldn't cause problems. She was tired of it, the way you get tired of any sustained, exhausting performance. Adrian looked at her. Direct quiet. "Tell me about before Daniel," he said. "Indiana. Who were you?" Nobody had asked her that in so long she almost didn't know how to answer it. Who were you? Not who are you, who were you before the 2 years that had shaped themselves around the absence of who she had been before. She thought about it. "I was good at math," she said. "I wanted to study business. I liked figures patterns, the way numbers have an internal logic that doesn't change based on who's looking at them." She paused. "Daniel thought numbers were boring. He thought I was wasting my time." "Did you stop?" Adrian said. "Studying." "I stopped everything," she said. "That's how it works. You give up one thing to keep the peace, and then another thing, and by the time you look up, you've given up the whole map, and you're standing somewhere you don't recognize, and you don't know how to get back, because you can't even remember where you started." The bar was quiet around them. Adrian was looking at her in the honest, direct way he had, not analyzing, not advising, just present, just listening, the most underestimated form of attention. "What would you do with it?" he said. "The numbers, if you had access to them." She looked at him. "What do you mean?" He turned and looked at the back of the bar, at the office door, at the space where the actual running of things happened. "The bar's accounts," he said. "The inventory management, the scheduling systems. Sophia does most of it now. She's good at it, but it's not her strength, and it takes hours she needs for other things." He looked back at Emily. "If you're good with numbers, I have numbers." She stared at him. "You're offering me the books," she said. "I'm offering you the civilian accounts," he said. "Bar revenue, inventory, payroll for the floor staff. Not anything that would—" He paused with the smallest degree of careful. "Not anything sensitive." She understood what he was saying. He was drawing her a clear line. Here is the world I am letting you into, and here is where that world ends. Transparent. Legible. "Why?" she said. Because she still needed to understand why. "Because you're wasted on carrying drinks," he said, not unkindly, as a plain fact. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "Okay." The accounts were a revelation. Not because they were complicated, they weren't. They were actually somewhat messily kept, with Sophia's characteristic practicality valued over elegance. But because the act of looking at them, of seeing the structure of a real business, and understanding how its parts worked, and where the inefficiencies were, and how they could be corrected, was the act of remembering something she had buried so deep she had stopped believing it was there. She was good at this. She was genuinely, specifically, practically good at this. The first time she came to Adrian with a reordered inventory system that she had built in an afternoon, with a spreadsheet that tracked waste against cost in a way the previous system hadn't. She expected him to look at it the way Daniel had looked at everything she tried, with the faint, patient condescension of a man who has already decided what you are capable of and is tolerating the evidence that you're trying to exceed it. Adrian looked at it for 4 minutes without speaking. Then he said, "This is better than what we had." 3 words. Present tense. No modification. Emily picked up her papers and walked back out and stood in the hallway for 30 seconds breathing. Then she went back to the bar, because there was always work. But the thing in her chest that had begun to move in the 3rd week was moving more freely now, and she stopped trying to put it back. It was Sophia who first said it out loud, which was consistent with Sophia, who had the particular gift of naming things accurately before anyone else was ready to name them. They were closing down one night, the two of them going through the end-of-night inventory, and Sophia said, without looking up from the clipboard, "You're different than you were 3 weeks ago." Emily kept wiping down the counter. "I'm sleeping," she said. "Actual sleep. I forgot what it does." "That's part of it," Sophia said. She looked up. Her dark eyes were direct and warm in the specific combination that was entirely Sophia's own. "He's good for you." Emily's hand stopped on the counter. "Sophia, I'm not talking about romance," Sophia said with a tone that made the word sound like an interesting but irrelevant category. "I'm talking about the fact that you came in here 3 weeks ago walking 3 inches shorter than you should be, and now you walk like someone who remembers they have a spine." Emily stood with that for a moment. "He hasn't done anything," she said. "He's given you space to do it yourself," Sophia said. "Which, for a woman like you, coming from what you're coming from, is the exact right thing." She made a note on the clipboard. "Don't waste it by being afraid of it." Emily looked at her. "You're very direct," she said. "Life is short," said Sophia. "Also, I've known Adrian for 9 years, and I've watched him treat everyone in this bar like they matter. This is the first time I've seen him give someone the books." She turned back to the clipboard. Emily turned back to the counter. The cloth moved in slow circles over the wood. She was thinking about what Sophia had said. Not the part about romance. The other part. "He's given you space to do it yourself," She was thinking about the difference between being given space and being given a boundary. The difference between a man who creates room for you and a man who creates walls and calls them protection. She had been inside Daniel's walls for 2 years, and she had not seen them for walls until she was on the outside of them, until she was standing in the cold on the other side with her $41, and the walls were behind her, and she was still standing. She thought about that. She thought about the way Adrian had looked at the spreadsheet for 4 minutes. She thought about the spreadsheet itself, the clean, clear logic of it, the numbers that added up into a picture of how something worked and what it needed. She thought about herself. Then she folded the cloth and laid it on the counter and said to Sophia's back, "I'm going to need access to the last 18 months of purchasing records. There's a pattern in the waste data I can't explain yet." Sophia turned. The corner of her mouth lifted. "I'll get them to you tomorrow," she said. "Thank you," said Emily. She picked up her jacket. She walked to the door. Outside Ravenport was doing what it did at midnight. Not quiet exactly, never entirely quiet, but lower reduced to its essential sounds, the sounds of a city exhaling. She walked the 3 blocks to the boarding house and let herself in with her key and climbed the stairs. She sat on the edge of her bed. She pulled out the small notebook she had bought at a corner store in the second week. Nothing particular, just a notebook, $5 college ruled, and she opened it to a blank page. She wrote Daniel's name at the top of the page. Underneath it, she wrote everything she knew about how he thought, how he operated, the pattern of his search, the PI, the public inquiries, the particular method of a man who used money and intimidation rather than intelligence, who had always assumed that his reach was longer than anyone else's, because he had never genuinely encountered a reach longer than his own. She stared at the page. Daniel didn't know where she was yet. She believed that. But Daniel didn't give up. That was the one thing she knew about him with absolute certainty. The thing that had kept her awake on good nights and destroyed her on bad ones. He didn't stop. He would try again. And when he tried again, she needed to be ready. Not running, not hiding. Ready. She closed the notebook. She turned off the light. She lay in the dark and thought about numbers and patterns and what they revealed about how things actually worked underneath the story being told about them. She thought about Adrian Voss, who had handed her the books without asking what she would find. She thought about what kind of man does that. Then she thought the kind who isn't afraid of what's in them. She fell asleep. Outside Ravenport went on being what it was. And 3 blocks away, in an office above a bar called the Black Rose, a man sat at a desk with 2 phones and a dry erase board, and one of those phones showed a recent inquiry from a PI in a suburb south of the city. And the man looked at it for a long time before setting the phone face down on the desk. He was not a man who reacted hastily. He was a man who waited until he understood the shape of a situation completely. But he was beginning to understand this one. And the shape of it made something very old and very quiet in him go still in the particular way of a man who has made a decision. He turned back to his work. The bar downstairs was closed. The woman 3 blocks away was asleep. And Daniel Cross, somewhere out in the city, or not yet in the city, had no idea what he had walked into. That was the last night any of them would have that kind of stillness. Because the next day, everything changed. The next day came in quietly, the way catastrophic days always do, without warning, without the sky changing color, or the air carrying anything different. Emily was at the Black Rose. By noon, she had taken to coming in early, on days when the accounting work was waiting, because the accounting work had become the best part of her days. The clearest evidence of who she was when nobody was telling her who she wasn't. And she was 3 hours into the purchasing records when her phone rang. She had a phone now. A prepaid one bought with her second paycheck with a number that belonged only to this version of her life. Only Sophia had the number. And Adrian because Sophia had given it to him, which Emily had discovered after the fact and had chosen not to address, because addressing it would have meant acknowledging that she was relieved. The number on the screen was one she didn't recognize. She let it ring. It rang again 10 minutes later. Same number. The third time she answered. Silence on the line for just long enough that she thought it was a mistake, a wrong number, nothing. Then his voice. Emily. Not Rachel, not the borrowed name, her name. The name she had not heard spoken in a month in Daniel's specific way of saying it, which had always carried the particular weight of ownership, the way certain people say a name, as if the saying of it constitutes a claim. She sat very still. "How did you get this number?" she said. Her voice came out level. She was proud of that. "That's not really the important question, is it?" Daniel said. His voice was pleasant. It was always pleasant. On the phone always had the quality of a man conducting a reasonable conversation, as if the content of what he was saying were entirely normal. She had spent 2 years being unsettled by that pleasantness. "The important question is why you ran, and why you've been hiding here of all places. Ravenport Emily, I would have expected more creativity from you." Her heartbeat was very loud. He knew where she was. Not approximately, not the city. He knew where she was. "I'm not coming back," she said. "I know you think that," Daniel said. "You've always had this streak, this dramatic streak where you decide something and you commit to it completely. I used to find it charming. You have no idea what you've walked into over there, sweetheart. You have no idea what kind of man runs that bar." "Don't call me sweetheart. Emily." The pleasantness cooled by one precise degree. "I'm trying to help you. That man is dangerous. The things he does, the things people like him do, you are not safe there. You need to come home." The word home landed like a fist, not because it hurt, because it didn't. Because she heard it with the part of her brain that had been slowly over 4 weeks of distance, learning to translate Daniel's language back into what it actually meant. Home meant back under his roof, back inside his control. Back in the space he had spent 2 years carefully constructing around her so that she would fit exactly the shape of what he needed. She was not going back into that shape. "I'm not coming back," she said again. "Don't call this number." She hung up. She set the phone on the desk. She sat looking at the purchasing records for a moment without seeing them. Then she stood up, walked to the door of the office, opened it, and called Sophia's name. Sophia appeared from the bar. Emily said, "He called. He has this number, and he knows I'm in Ravenport." Sophia's expression moved through several things quickly. Then she said, "Come with me." Adrian was at a meeting 3 blocks away. Sophia called him, and he was back at the bar in 7 minutes, which told Emily something about the meeting and something about the call. He came through the back door and looked at Emily and didn't say anything for a moment. She told him everything. The call, the number, the pleasantness in Daniel's voice that was its own specific threat. The fact that he had mentioned Adrian, mentioned knowing who ran the bar. When she finished, Adrian said, "He's been talking to someone local." "Briggs," Sophia said. "He couldn't have gotten the number from Briggs. Briggs didn't have it." "Not Briggs," Adrian said. He was quiet for a moment thinking, and she recognized the quality of his thinking, now the way it went inward, and came back out already organized. "One of our suppliers. Someone who's seen Emily here and connected her to a description. Someone with a reason to make a call they shouldn't have made." "Who?" Sophia said. "I'll know by tonight," Adrian said. He looked at Emily. "He's trying to shake you. The call was to see if you'd run again." "I know," she said. "Are you going to run?" She looked at him. "No," she said, and meant it completely in a way she could feel in her sternum. Something in his face settled. "Good," he said. "Because running is the only thing that actually helps him right now. He doesn't have enough yet. He made contact too early, which means he's not as sure of his position as he wants you to think." "He's desperate," Emily said, not a question. She was reading it now through the lens Adrian had given her, the lens of someone who understood how people use power when they feel it slipping. "Yes," Adrian said. "Desperate men do unpredictable things," she said. He looked at her with an expression she had learned to read, the look that meant she had said something accurate that he was adding to his picture of her. "Yes," he said again. "Which is why starting tonight you're not walking back to the boarding house alone." She opened her mouth. He spoke first. Not a discussion. She closed her mouth. Then she said, "Fine, but I want to know everything you find out. I won't be managed. I won't be kept on the side of my own situation." The pause before he answered was exactly long enough to be real. "Agreed," he said. He found the supplier by 8 that evening, a man named Cotelli, who ran a liquor distribution operation on the south side, and who had a sideline in information, a common enough arrangement in the kind of city where information had value, and everyone was looking to expand their margins. Cotelli had seen Emily during a delivery 3 weeks earlier, and had put the pieces together when Daniel's network started circulating descriptions. The call to Daniel's people had been brief and had earned Cotelli enough to cover a week's expenses. Emily found out because Adrian told her directly in the office before he did anything about it. He sat across from her and laid it out. "This is what happened. This is how it happened. This is what it means." "What are you going to do?" she said. "Make clear that this bar and everyone in it is not available as a resource to outside parties," he said. "Cotelli will understand the message. He won't repeat the behavior." She looked at him. "You're not going to hurt him." It came out like a statement, but it was a question, and he knew it was a question. "No," he said. "Not for this. What he did was stupid and greedy, but it's not violence, and it doesn't warrant violence." He said it plainly, in the tone of someone explaining a principle they've held for a long time. "I don't use force to solve problems that can be solved with clarity." She sat with that. "Daniel would have," she said. "Made it much worse than necessary, I mean. As a demonstration. I know men like Daniel," Adrian said. "They use maximum force on minimum problems because the force is the point. It's not about the problem. It's about making sure everyone is reminded who has the force." Emily looked at him. "You're describing yourself in reverse," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. "I suppose I am." 3 days passed. They were strange days, dense with a specific kind of tension that Emily had learned to recognize, the tension of waiting for something you know is coming, but can't. Time like a storm you can smell in the air before the clouds organize themselves. She worked. She ran the accounts. She walked back to the boarding house at the end of each night with Marcus, one of Adrian's people, a quiet man in his 30s, who said almost nothing on these walks, but had a presence that made the street feel smaller, safer, more containable. She slept better than she expected. On the morning of the 4th day, she woke at 5 in the morning, with the specific heart-hammering clarity of a nightmare she couldn't fully remember. Only the residue of it. Daniel's voice in some room she couldn't leave, and she lay in the dark with her eyes open and felt the fear that she had been holding at a managed distance come flooding back all at once, the way suppressed things always did in the small hours when the management systems were offline. She got up. She made tea on the small hot plate the boarding house allowed. She sat at the narrow table with her notebook and her tea, and she thought. She thought about the phone call. She thought about the pleasantness of Daniel's voice and what lived underneath it, and what he would do when the investigator routes kept coming back empty, and the pressure in him kept building with nowhere to go. She thought about what she knew about Daniel, and then with the particular clarity of 5 in the morning and a month of actual sleep and access to her own mind for the first time in 2 years, she thought about what she knew about herself. She had the purchasing records. She had 18 months of bar data that she had organized into something coherent. She had in the last 2 weeks identified 3 separate inefficiencies in the bar's supply chain that were costing the Black Rose more than it knew. She had built something real with her own hands and her own mind and a borrowed name, and the thing she had built was good, and no one had given it to her, and no one could take it away by convincing her it didn't exist. She wrote in the notebook for an hour. When she was done, she had a clear picture. Not a plan exactly, not yet, but the beginning of one. She closed the notebook and got dressed and went to the bar early. The message came on the 5th day, not a phone call this time, a note. It appeared at the bar, slipped under the front door before opening, which meant sometime in the night or early morning when the street was empty. Sophia found it and brought it directly to Adrian, and Adrian brought it to Emily. And this was how Emily knew that something had changed, that the balance of information sharing had shifted without being discussed, that Adrian now defaulted to telling her rather than deciding for her. The note was brief. Emily, you need to understand what you're in the middle of. That man is not who you think. Come meet me. 1 hour, alone. The coffee shop on Mercer. If you don't come, I start making calls to people who will find what I need one way or another. D. She read it twice. Then she set it on the desk. He wants to meet, she said. I know what he wants, Adrian said. His voice was level, but underneath the levelness was something she had not heard there before, a tightness controlled and precise, the sound of a man managing something. He's going to try the angle about you, she said. He said it on the phone. He said you're dangerous, that I don't know what I'm in the middle of. He's going to try to use your reputation to scare me back. He's not wrong about my reputation, Adrian said. Your reputation is not my problem, Emily said. My problem is Daniel, and Daniel's problem is that I left. Adrian looked at her. You're not meeting him alone, he said. I know, she said. You're not meeting him at all. She paused. Adrian, not because you can't handle it, he said, and the specificity of the clarification was something she filed away. Because meeting him alone on his terms in a location he chose is giving him the framework he's built for this. You're responding. You're coming when called. That's his dynamic, not yours. She looked at the note. He was right. She knew he was right. She could feel it in the phrasing of the note itself, the implicit command structure of it, the way it was written, as if she were already agreeing, already on her way. Daniel had always been good at writing the ending before the story happened. Then what? She said. Then nothing, Adrian said. He waits. We don't respond. He said he'd make calls, she said, to people who could find what he needs. Let him, Adrian said. Anyone he calls in this city is going to get the same answer Briggs got. And anyone he brings in from outside is going to find out very quickly that they're in the wrong city. He said this with the quiet, absolute certainty of a man who is not making a threat, because threats are for situations where the outcome is in doubt. Emily looked at him. You're protecting me, she said. Yes. And that doesn't feel like anything other than what it is, she said. She needed to ask it. She needed to say the thing out loud in the space between them and see what it did. Adrian understood the question. She could tell by the way he didn't misread it, didn't reach for the easy answer. I'm protecting you because you came into my house and you had something worth protecting, he said. And because the man who's looking for you has spent years convincing you that you don't deserve protection. I want to be very clear that he's wrong about that. He paused. But what I do with that clarity is mine to decide, and what you do with yours is yours. I'm not asking for anything back. I'm not keeping a ledger. There's no return required. The silence after that was the heaviest and clearest silence Emily had experienced in as long as she could remember. She sat in it for a long moment. Then she said quietly, I know. And she meant I believe you, which was the largest thing she had said to any person in 2 years. Daniel did not wait. This was the thing about desperate men, they couldn't. The desperation had its own momentum, its own requirement for action, and when the action was blocked in one direction, it looked for another. He found another. He found it in the form of a woman named Sandra, who worked at the boarding house where Emily rented her room. Sandra was in her late 50s, well-meaning, and somewhat susceptible to a charming man with a compelling story about a missing girlfriend, a concerned partner just trying to make sure she was safe. Daniel was very good at the concerned partner story. He had the vocabulary for it, the right proportion of worry, to restrain the careful sadness of a man whose love had confused itself with control so long ago that he genuinely couldn't locate the seam between them. Sandra, who had a soft heart and limited experience with men who used soft hearts as tools, told Daniel which room Emily was in. She told him this at 4 in the afternoon. By 5, Sophia knew. Sophia knew because Sandra felt guilty about it approximately 20 minutes after the fact, and called the bar. She had the bar's number from a flyer, had been meaning to come in sometime, and told Sophia what she had done with the shaking voice of a woman who had already understood she had made a mistake and was trying to limit the damage. Sophia called Adrian. Adrian was at the bar within 4 minutes. He came in through the back and walked directly to the office where Emily was still working on the accounts, and the look on his face when he came through the door was the kind of look that bypasses all intermediate stages and communicates the essential information in the first second. Emily stood up. "He knows the room," she said. "Yes." "How long ago?" "An hour, maybe less." She picked up her notebook. Her hands were not shaking. This surprised her, and then it didn't, because she had been preparing for this, had understood at 5 in the morning. In her room with her tea and her notebook, that Daniel would find a human door. Eventually, because that was what he did. He found doors in people, he found the soft places, and he leaned on them, and someone was always going to open. "I'm not going back there tonight," she said. "No," Adrian said. I don't have a plan for where else." "I do," he said. She looked at him. "There's an apartment above the bar," he said. "It's been empty for 8 months. It's clean, and it has a lock that nothing short of a professional is getting through. You can stay there until we resolve this." She stood in the middle of the office and looked at him. Every warning system she had, every learned reflex from 2 years of a man who solved her problems for her by making her problems his property, and then by extension making her his property. Every muscle memory of saying yes when she should have found a different answer. All of it active. All of it firing. And underneath all of it, the quiet voice of 5 in the morning, and honest sleep, and 4 weeks of becoming more herself than she had been in years. "This is different, and you know it is. I'm paying rent," she said. The corner of his mouth moved, just barely. "We'll deduct it from your accounting fees," he said. "I don't have accounting fees. You haven't offered them." "I'm offering them now," he said. "Then we can discuss the rent," she said. He nodded. "Get what you need from the boarding house," he said. "Marcus will go with you. Be in and out in 10 minutes. "I only have 1 bag," she said. "I've always only had 1 bag. Something crossed his face. Then not pity. She had become good at recognizing pity and rejecting it. This was something different, something more like the look of a person who has heard the summary of a long story in a single sentence and understood the full weight of it. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. She went with Marcus, and she was in and out in 8 minutes, and she carried her suitcase back to the Black Rose under a sky that was going dark at the edges, and she walked through the bar's back door and up the stairs to the apartment above it, and she set the suitcase down on the floor. The room was clean. He hadn't lied about that. She stood in the middle of it for a moment. Then she opened the suitcase, took out the notebook, and set it on the table. She was still there. That was what mattered. She was still there. She heard from Daniel that night. He called the boarding house and was told she had checked out. He called her cell phone, and she let it ring. Then he did the thing she had been expecting him to do, the thing she had written in her notebook at 5 in the morning. As the most likely escalation, he showed up at the Black Rose. She wasn't behind the bar when he walked in. She was upstairs. But Sophia called her on the bar phone 30 seconds after he came through the door, and Emily stood at the top of the stairs and heard Sophia's voice. "He's here. Adrian's with him. Stay upstairs." She stayed upstairs for 30 seconds. Then she came down. She came through the bar's back door into the main room, and she saw him immediately, because he was the kind of man who positioned himself in the center of whatever room he was in. The axis point, the thing you were supposed to orient around. Daniel Cross was 41 years old and looked younger, with the practiced presentation of a man who understood that appearance was a tool. He was well-dressed, good-looking, in a specific and deliberate way, and he had the quality of intensity that some people found magnetic before they understood what the intensity was actually aimed at. He was standing at the bar with the pleasant, reasonable expression he always wore in public, the face that said, "Surely we can resolve this like adults." Adrian was standing 4 feet from him. The bar had gone quiet in the specific way of a room that has identified a situation. Emily walked forward. Daniel saw her. The pleasant expression shifted not to something ugly. Not yet Daniel was too controlled for ugly in public to something personal, the face of a man accessing a private channel. "Emily," he said. "Thank God, I've been worried sick." "No, you haven't," she said. She was surprised by how steady she felt. Not fearless, she was not going to pretend she was fearless, because the fear was real. The body remembered. The body had a whole library of memories of what it had cost her to be in a room with this man when the expression changed. But the steadiness was also real, and it was in front of the fear, and that was new. "We need to talk," Daniel said, privately. "We don't," she said. "Emily." The tone shifted one measured degree. "You've been gone for a month. I've been out of my mind. Whatever happened, whatever argument we had, we can fix it. We've always been able to fix things." "We didn't have an argument," she said. "I left. Those are different. You don't understand what you've gotten yourself involved in," he said. He looked at Adrian, a deliberate look, the look designed to make the point without making the accusation directly. "This man is dangerous, Emily. The things he does in this city—" "What he does in this city is not your business," Emily said. "And neither am I." Something moved behind Daniel's eyes. The pleasant expression developed a hairline fracture. "You're upset," he said. "I understand, but you're making decisions from a place of emotion, and you're going to regret—" "Daniel!" Her voice was quiet. "Look at me." He looked at her. "I'm not upset," she said. "I'm clear. For the first time in 2 years, I am completely clear. And what I'm clear about is this. I left, I'm not coming back, and there is no version of this conversation that ends differently. You can be pleasant about it, or you can be something else about it, but the outcome is the same." The hairline fracture widened. "You think this man cares about you," Daniel said, and now the pleasantness was going, and what was underneath it was the thing she had lived with for 2 years, cold and certain. "You think you're special to him. You have no idea how many women come through places like this, Emily. You have no idea how this works. Mr. Cross." Adrian's voice. One phrase, 2 words, in a register that required nothing further. Daniel stopped. He looked at Adrian, and Emily watched. She had been watching since she walked in, filing every micro-expression, because 2 years with Daniel had made her an expert in his face. She watched the thing that Daniel could not hide, even when he was excellent at hiding things. The thing underneath the confidence and the pleasantness and the controlled performance. Fear. A very specific fear. The fear of a man who has just accurately assessed the gap between his power and someone else's and found the gap unbridgeable. "This bar is my house," Adrian said. "You came into it. You asked questions of people in it. You frightened a woman who works here. In my city, in my house, that has consequences." He paused. "I'm choosing to make those consequences simple, because I think simple is better than complicated, and because Emily is asking me to be reasonable, and she's earned the right to ask that of me." Another pause. "Leave Ravenport. Don't contact her again. What happens in the next 30 seconds is what determines what happens after that." Silence. Daniel Cross stood in the amber light of the Black Rose and looked at Adrian Voss and looked at Emily Carter, and the calculation he ran was visible for just a moment in the architecture of his face. He was calculating whether he had any move available to him. He didn't. He knew he didn't. The pleasant expression reassembled itself. The smooth surface came back. But Emily could see the difference now in a way she hadn't been able to see it 2 years ago. Because 2 years ago, she had been too close and too eroded to see clearly. But now she could see the pleasantness was a surface, and beneath it was a man who understood he had lost the room and was looking for the exit with his dignity intact. He looked at Emily. "This isn't over," he said, quietly, for her alone. And something happened in Emily Carter's chest when he said it. Not fear, not the old knee-buckle response of her nervous system to that tone, but something much more fundamental. Anger. Clean, solid, real anger, without the guilt that had always complicated it before, without the layer of, maybe he has a point, or maybe I'm being dramatic, that Daniel had spent 2 years applying to every authentic emotion she had. Anger, without modification. "Yes, it is," she said. He left. The door closed. The bar held its breath for one more second, and then the room came back, conversations restarting, glasses, moving, the ordinary business of a night, resuming as if a storm had passed and left the air cleaner than before. Emily stood in the middle of the floor. She became aware that her hands were shaking, not with fear, with the adrenaline of having stood in front of the thing that had defined her fear for 2 years and not moved. The shaking was just chemistry, just the body processing something the mind had already gotten through. Sophia appeared at her elbow with a glass of water. Emily took it, drank. "You okay?" Sophia said. And Emily thought about the first time she had been asked that question in this bar, by a man at the end of the counter, and how she had given the automatic answer, and how he had known it was automatic. "I'm angry," she said. "Is that okay?" "That is absolutely okay," Sophia said, with a certainty that asked no further questions. Emily drank the rest of the water. She set the glass on the bar. She looked at the door that Daniel had walked out of, and then she turned around and looked at Adrian, who was standing where he had been standing throughout, looking at her with the direct, honest attention that she had learned to read as accurately as anything she had ever known. She said, "He's not going to stay gone." "I know," Adrian said. "He meant what he said, that this isn't over." "I know that too." She looked at him. "Then what do we do?" He was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of a man who doesn't know. The silence of a man who does know and is deciding how much to say. "We prepare," he said. "And you stop running in your head." She blinked. "What?" "You've been running since he walked in," Adrian said. "Not physically. In here." He didn't gesture, but she understood the here. "You've been calculating exits. I can see it. It's what you've been trained to do when he's in a room. Prepare to leave. Prepare to disappear. Prepare to start over somewhere else." He looked at her steadily. "You don't have to do that anymore. You're not leaving. You're preparing to stay. That's a different calculation." She stood very still. The distinction landed with the specific weight of something true, something that reorganized the furniture of a room she had been living in. Preparing to stay. She had spent so long preparing to leave, packing the mental bag, identifying the exits, keeping herself just adjacent to any place, so that she could separate from it quickly, when necessary, that staying had stopped feeling like an option. Staying felt like the thing that got you caught. Staying felt like the mistake. But that was Daniel's logic. That was 2 years of Daniel's logic inside her, teaching her that the only safety was mobility, and mobility kept her small, kept her rootless, kept her exactly the kind of person who could be found again and again, because she never built anything that required her to be present for it. She was present for the accounts on Adrian's desk. She was present for the purchasing records and the spreadsheet and the patterns she had found. She was present for Sophia's midnight inventory counts and the key on her keyring and the room above the bar that was now hers. She was present for this moment, in this room, standing on ground that she had chosen. "Okay," she said. It was quiet, but it was the loudest thing she had said since "let go of me." Adrian nodded once. Sophia behind the bar made a sound that might have been the kind of sound a person makes when something has been confirmed that they already knew. Emily picked up the glass from the bar. She walked back through to the kitchen. She filled the glass with water. She stood at the sink and breathed. She thought he will come back. She knew Daniel well enough to know that a man who defined himself by his grip on things did not simply open his hand. He would recalibrate. He would find a different angle. He would find the thing that looked like a door in this new situation. The soft place, the human gap, because that was what he had always done. But she thought something else too. She thought, I know his patterns. I have spent 2 years inside his method, and I understand it from the inside, from the mechanism up, the way you understand a lock when you've been on the wrong side of it. And she thought the notebook, the notes she had made at 5 in the morning, the map of Daniel's behavior, the anticipation of escalation. She set down the glass. She walked back upstairs. She sat at the table and opened the notebook. She turned to a new page. At the top, she wrote, what he will do next. And she began to write. Because she was not preparing to leave anymore. She was preparing to stay. And staying required understanding everything. She wrote for 2 hours. Downstairs, the bar ran its course, the slow accumulation of night voices and glasses, and the ordinary human business of people gathering in a place where they felt for a few hours less alone. Adrian did not come upstairs. He gave her the space to do what she needed to do, which was the thing he was best at. The thing she was only beginning to understand as a form of care so specific and so unusual that she didn't have a language for it yet. She wrote. Outside Ravenport went on being what it was. And somewhere in the city, Daniel Cross was in a room she couldn't see doing the same thing she was doing, calculating. The difference was, he was calculating how to get her back. She was calculating how to make sure he never could. One of them was working with the truth. And the truth Emily had learned was the only thing that lasted. She was right about one thing. Daniel did not stay gone. He lasted 4 days. 4 days of silence that Emily did not trust for a single hour of any of them, because she knew his silences the way a sailor knows weather, not by what they looked like on the surface, but by what she could feel changing in the pressure underneath. She had written in her notebook every evening after her shift, building the map of his likely next move, and on the 3rd day she had written, he will try to separate me from Adrian. Not through me, through Adrian. He will look for the thing that makes Adrian step back. She read that line back on the morning of the 4th day, and understood she had been right about the method before she knew what the specific form would take. The form arrived at 10 in the morning as a courier envelope addressed to the Black Rose, marked for Adrian's attention, containing a single folded sheet of paper with a print of a news article from 11 years ago. The headline read, 3 dead in suspected organized crime dispute on Ravenport's west side. Police name, person of interest. The person of interest was Adrian Voss. Emily was in the office when Adrian opened it. She saw his face before she saw the contents. The slight controlled stillness of a man absorbing a hit he expected might come but not quite from this angle. And then he handed it to her without comment. She read it. Then she set it on the desk. He sent this to you, not to me, she said. Yes, because he wants you to show it to me, or he wants you to feel that I might see it and pull back. He wants this to create distance. She paused. Between us. Adrian looked at her steadily. Does it? She looked at him. You were 29 years old, she said. 11 years ago. And this is a news article, not a conviction. She picked up the sheet and looked at it again. He printed this from a local archive. It took him exactly the amount of effort it takes to find old news online and walk into a copy shop. She set it back down. He wants me to be afraid of you. You should probably know, Adrian said, that the event in that article is not the totality of what I've done or been involved in over the last 12 years. I don't want to manage what you know about me. She looked at him. I already know what you are, she said. I've known since the 2nd week, Sophia told me, and before Sophia told me I'd worked it out from everything I was watching. She held his gaze. I know who you are and what you run, and I'm standing in this office. That's my answer. The silence lasted exactly long enough. Then Adrian picked up the sheet of paper and folded it once and placed it in the bottom drawer of his desk. He's escalating, he said. This was phase 2. What's phase 3, she said. Something that requires him to believe he's out of alternatives, Adrian said. Which means something that's less about persuasion and more about force. He looked at her. I need to know everything you wrote in that notebook. Everything you know about how he thinks when he's backed into a corner. She picked up the notebook from the desk where she'd left it that morning. She opened it to the page she'd titled, "What He Will Do Next." "Sit down," she said. He sat. She talked for 40 minutes. The thing that surprised her was how much she knew. She had spent 2 years being convinced by Daniel that she was not perceptive, not clever, not capable of reading a room or understanding subtext or anticipating what came next. He had very deliberately positioned himself as the one who understood how the world worked, who could see around corners, who needed to manage things because she couldn't be trusted to manage them correctly. But sitting across from Adrian Voss, laying out everything she had observed and recorded and analyzed about Daniel's patterns, she understood something with a clarity that made her stop mid-sentence. She had learned from him, not the lessons he intended. But she had spent 2 years in close proximity to a man who was expert at reading people, expert at identifying vulnerability, expert at finding the specific lever that moved a specific person, and she had been paying attention the whole time. Not consciously. But the way a person absorbs the mechanics of a craft they're surrounded by, she had internalized his method. She knew exactly how Daniel Cross thought. She knew because she had survived it. Adrian listened without interrupting. This was one of his gifts, the genuine active quality of his listening, the kind that didn't rush ahead or try to complete your thoughts, that waited for the full shape of what you were saying. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "He'll make a move on the building," he said. "Not this building, your building. He wants to find you without me around." "He knows I'm above the bar," she said. "He suspects it. He doesn't know it, or we'd have heard something already." Adrian leaned forward. "He's going to create a reason for you to step outside the perimeter." "He'll use someone I'd respond to," Emily said. "Not a stranger, someone who seems safe." They looked at each other. "Sophia," Emily said. "Sophia is not naive," Adrian said immediately. "I know. But he doesn't know what Sophia is. He sees a woman behind a bar. He'll underestimate her." She paused. "He'd approach her as a mutual contact, pretend to be worried about me, ask Sophia to pass a message. And if Sophia passes the message, I go to meet him somewhere he's controlled," Emily said. "Somewhere with his people. Somewhere I can't walk out of easily." Adrian's jaw tightened. Not dramatically, barely visible, but she caught it. "He's not going to get that opportunity," he said. "Adrian." She said his name the way she meant it, not as a placeholder, but as a signal that she needed him to hear what came next. "I've been thinking about something, since last night." She looked at him. "I don't want to hide from this anymore." "Emily, let me finish." Her voice was steady. "I've been running. First physically 3 buses, fake name New City. Then emotionally staying small, staying quiet, hoping he'd just exhaust himself and stop. And now spatially living above the bar, staying inside the perimeter, letting you position your people around me." She paused. "Every one of those responses is a response he designed. He taught me that the only move available to me was retreat. And as long as I'm retreating, he has the initiative." Adrian was watching her with the still focused attention of a man tracking something important. "What are you saying?" he said. "I'm saying I want to stop responding to him," she said. "I want to move first." The plan she proposed was not complicated. Complicated plans had too many hinges, too many points where the unexpected could pivot everything. What she wanted was simple, controlled contact on ground she chose with information Daniel didn't know she had. Adrian didn't like it. He said so directly. Which was the thing about him. He disagreed out loud, and in plain language, without the passive architectural of a man who was going to find a way to prevent the thing he disapproved of through indirect means. He said, "I don't like this." And he said why, and she listened to why, and then she told him what she thought the alternative cost her. "Every day I wait is a day he's working," she said. "And he is working. He doesn't stop working. That's what I know about him that you don't. He's not going to run out of patience. He's going to keep finding new angles until he finds one that works." She looked at him. "The only thing that ends this is ending it. Not waiting it out. Not hoping he gives up. Ending it. If you meet with him, he wants to meet with me alone, she said, to convince me that you're dangerous, that I'm being manipulated, that the only safe choice is to go back with him. She looked at Adrian. What he doesn't know is that I've spent 2 years being an expert in exactly what he's doing, and I can see it from the outside now in a way I never could from the inside. He's unpredictable when he feels cornered, Adrian said. I know. She met his eyes. That's why I need you there. Not visible, but there. The pause was long enough to be real, not long enough to be refusal. Where? He said. The bar, she said. His territory was the meeting place he chose. My territory is here. I want him on my ground. Something shifted in Adrian's face. Not agreement. Not yet. Something in between the look of a man revising his picture of a situation based on new information about one of its components. You've thought about this, he said. For 2 days, she said. Another pause. You're not doing it alone, he said. I know. Sophia stays visible. Marcus is at the door. I'm in the back. Agreed. And if it goes wrong, then it goes wrong with you 30 feet away, she said, which is 30 feet closer than any backup I've ever had in my life. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, All right. She called Daniel. She used her cell phone, her real one, the number he already had. She called him at 7 in the evening because she knew his pattern 7 was the time he felt most confident after work hours, the part of the evening that belonged to him. He answered on the second ring. Emily. The relief in his voice was practiced but present. That was the thing about Daniel. Even his performance contained something real. I was worried you wouldn't call. I want to meet, she said. Tomorrow, the bar where I work. A pause. That's not exactly neutral ground. No, she said, it's not. He was quiet for a moment. She could hear him recalculating. All right, he said. Noon. 7, she said. Evening, after the bar opens. She wanted witnesses. She wanted the ordinary business of a functioning evening as the backdrop, not an empty room, not a controlled space that he could manage. 7, he agreed. She hung up. She sat with the phone in her hand for a moment. Sophia appeared in the doorway. Done, she said. Done, Emily said. Sophia looked at her with the particular expression Emily had come to understand, as Sophia's version of deep feeling compressed, private expressed in the steadiness of her gaze, rather than in anything she said. You're not the same woman who walked in here 5 weeks ago, Sophia said. No, Emily said. I'm not. What changed? Emily thought about it. I stopped believing his version of me, she said. Sophia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Good. She turned and went back to the bar. Emily sat in the office alone for a moment. Then she picked up the notebook and turned to a blank page. She wrote, Tomorrow. She stared at the word for a moment. Then she wrote underneath it, Say the true thing. Just the true thing. The rest will hold itself. Gan. The morning of the meeting, everything happened at once. Marcus came in at 9 with information that changed the shape of the day. Daniel had not come to Ravenport alone. He had 2 men with him staying at a hotel 4 blocks south. Men he'd brought from Columbus. Not professionals exactly, but the kind of men who were available for hire by someone with enough money and enough of a particular reputation, the specific muscle that men like Daniel kept in their peripheral network for situations they expected might require a particular kind of resolution. Emily was at the desk when Marcus told her. Her first response was a physical one, the cold wave moving through her, the body saying danger in its oldest and most honest language. She let it move through her. She breathed. Then she looked at Adrian, who was standing by the window. He's planning to take me, she said. He's planning to try, Adrian said. This isn't a conversation anymore, she said. He never intended it to be a conversation. He agreed to the meeting because he thought it gave him an opportunity. Yes, Adrian said. His voice was very level. Which means we were right to control the location. He turned to Marcus. How visible? Stayed in last night. One of them walked the block this morning, casual looking at storefronts. He went past twice. He was mapping the street, Emily said. Yes, Adrian said. He thinks he knows what he's walking into, she said. He thinks he does, Adrian said. He looked at her. You don't have to do this today. We can change the approach. No, she said immediately. Emily, if we change it now, he adjusts too. We lose the advantage of him thinking this is the meeting he planned. She paused. He planned a meeting where he and his men walk out with me, and I don't come back to Ravenport. He doesn't know what we planned. She met Adrian's eyes. I want to use that gap. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. You understand this isn't without risk, he said. Everything I've done in the last 5 weeks has had risk, she said. The difference is now I'm choosing it. He held her gaze. Then he turned to Marcus and began talking in the direct, rapid shorthand of a man deploying resources. And Emily sat in the chair and listened and understood that the next 8 hours were going to be the longest and most important 8 hours of the last 2 years of her life. Lol. The afternoon was practical. This was the thing about Adrian that she would think about afterward, that in a situation with genuine stakes, his response was intensely practical, not dramatic. He didn't make speeches. He didn't reassure her with promises he couldn't control. He moved through the afternoon like a man preparing a space, thoughtfully, methodically attending to the specific details that made the difference between a controlled situation and an uncontrolled one. He had 4 of his people positioned before 5 o'clock. Not visibly, not the kind of visible that would signal to Daniel that the ground had shifted, but present. Sophia was behind the bar, which was where Sophia always was, which meant her presence communicated nothing abnormal. The bar would open at 6. Real customers would come in. The ordinariness of the evening was the camouflage. At 5:30, Emily went upstairs. She sat at the table with her notebook and her cold coffee from that morning, and she read what she had written. The map of Daniel's behavior. The pattern of his escalation. The specific things he said when he felt he was losing control of a situation, the way he pivoted to guilt, to fear, to the leveraging of whatever he had identified as the load-bearing wall of your confidence, the thing you needed to believe about yourself in order to function, and his particular skill at finding that wall and hitting it. Her load-bearing wall for 2 years had been the belief that she was capable, that she could think, work, contribute, build something. He had identified it quickly within the first few months, she understood now, and he had spent 2 years applying pressure to it, so consistently and so quietly, that she had stopped checking it for damage, had simply incorporated the structural failure into her sense of herself, had started to build around the crack rather than repair it. She had repaired it. She had repaired it with purchasing records and a spreadsheet and 18 months of data that told a clear story about how a real business functioned and what it needed. And with the 4 words Adrian had said about her work, this is better than what we had. Daniel could not take that back. He could say whatever he was going to say tonight, and she already knew most of what he was going to say, but he could not reach through what the last 5 weeks had made her and pull it apart, because it was not made of the things he had installed in her. It was made of things she had built herself, and she knew the difference between those 2 kinds of structure now. She closed the notebook. She went to the small bathroom in the apartment and washed her face and looked at herself in the mirror. She looked like herself. She hadn't always been able to say that. Okay, she said to herself quietly. She went downstairs. Daniel arrived at 7:04. He came through the front door of the Black Rose in the way he did everything, with the assurance of a man who has always believed the room rearranges itself to accommodate him. He was alone visibly, which meant his 2 men were outside or staged nearby, which Adrian already knew and had already accounted for. He saw Emily immediately. She was behind the bar standing next to Sophia because she had decided she wanted to be on her feet and on her own ground when he walked in, rather than sitting at a table waiting for him, which was the posture of someone who had accepted the structure of a meeting he had organized. He came to the bar. "You look well," he said. He said it the way he said everything pleasant, with just enough warmth to seem genuine and just enough precision to remind you he was choosing to offer it. "Thank you," she said. "This is—" He looked around. "Not what I expected." "What did you expect?" He smiled. "Something more private." "I don't need privacy for this conversation," she said. "I don't have anything to say to you that I'd be embarrassed for other people to hear." The smile stayed, but its quality changed. "Can we sit?" he said. "We can stand," she said. "This won't take long." Something moved through his eyes. The calculation she had seen before the rapid assessment of available leverage and how to deploy it. "Emily?" he said, and his voice dropped into the register he used for moments he wanted to be intimate, to create the artificial closeness that bypassed the rational and went straight for something older. "I know this has been hard. I know you're angry. And you have every right to be angry. I made mistakes. I know that. I handled things wrong, and I know that too." He paused, perfectly timed. "But I love you. That's not a mistake. That's real." She listened. She let him speak. And she noticed for the first time in 2 years that she was listening to this particular speech from a place of pure clarity. Not the complicated, guilty, torn clarity of a woman who believed some of it, but the clean clarity of a woman who recognized it as a speech she had heard components of before, assembled from his working vocabulary. The words he had learned, worked, and used until they were worn smooth. "I know you think you're better off here," he said. "I know you feel like something is different, something has changed. But Emily, I know you. I know you better than anyone in this room knows you. And what I know is that you're scared. And when you're scared, you do this, you run. You find something that feels safe, and you attach to it, and I understand that I do. But this, the faintest emphasis on this meaning. The bar meaning Adrian, meaning the life she had built in 5 weeks. This is not real. What we had was real." She waited until he finished. Then she said, "Are you done?" He blinked. The rhythm of his speech had anticipated something different. Argument, emotion. The engagement that meant she was still inside his structure. "I'm not trying to fight," he said. "I know you're not," she said. "Fighting would mean you thought I had a position worth engaging with. What you're doing is explaining to me why my position is wrong. Those are different." A small silence. "Emily, you said you know me," she said. "You said you know me better than anyone in this room." She looked at him steadily. "You don't. You know who I was when I believed what you told me about myself. That person doesn't exist anymore." She held his gaze. The person standing here built something real in 5 weeks with her own mind and her own work. You want to tell me that's not real? That's not your call to make? His jaw tightened. There it was. Underneath the pleasantness and the practiced warmth, the thing she had always known was there, but could never quite reach because it had been buried under so many layers of his presentation. The anger. Real anger. The anger of a man who has decided something belongs to him and is being told it doesn't. "You have no idea," he said quietly, "what you've walked into. This man—" "Stop," she said. "This man is not someone who keeps people safe. He is someone who uses people and disposes of them when they're no longer—" "Stop." Her voice was still quiet. She did not raise it. "I need you to hear me. I need you to actually hear this, because I'm only going to say it once." She waited until his mouth closed. "You spent 2 years telling me I was not capable, not smart enough, not strong enough, not able to survive on my own. You took my money, and my friends, and my confidence, and my time, and you did it carefully, and you did it so slowly that I didn't see it happening. But I see it now." She paused. "And the fact that you came here with men outside planning to walk me out of a bar against my will is just the final proof of the thing I already knew. You were never trying to protect me. You were trying to own me. And I am not yours." The silence in the bar was absolute. Sophia was behind the counter still. The handful of evening regulars had gone very quiet in the way of people who have understood they are witnessing something that matters. Daniel's face had gone through several things while she spoke. Now it settled into something she had seen only rarely in the worst moments of the Daniel years, when the performance failed entirely, and what was underneath showed through like bone through skin. "You're making a mistake," he said. His voice was very low. "Then it's my mistake," she said. "Which is something I haven't been allowed to have in 2 years, so I'll take it." He looked at her. She looked back. And he understood, she could see the moment he understood that the woman standing behind this bar was not available to him. Not through guilt, not through fear, not through the elaborate machinery of his influence that had run so smoothly for so long. The gears found no purchase. He was going to make one more move. She knew it before he made it, because she knew his patterns, and the pattern when persuasion failed was force, and force was outside. "Marco," he said. Not to her. Past her. She turned. 2 men had come in through the front door. She had not heard them, which meant they had come in quietly, which meant they had been waiting outside for this signal, which meant he had planned this moment from the beginning. Her heartbeat spiked, and then Adrian Voss walked out of the back. He didn't run. He didn't move quickly. He walked with the same deliberate, unhurried quality he brought to every situation he entered, and the room, which had already been tense, went a different kind of still. The specific stillness of a room that has recognized an authority it understands without being told. Behind the 2 men, the bar's front door opened again. Marcus. And 2 others Emily recognized from the bar's regular staff. Daniel looked around the room. The calculation happening in his face was visible, and what it produced was the first genuinely unmanaged expression she had ever seen on him. Not anger, not pleasantness, not any of the calibrated masks, just the raw, stripped look of a man who has run out of moves. "Get out," Adrian said. He said it to Daniel, not to the 2 men, to Daniel directly. "This isn't—" Daniel started. "Get out of my bar," Adrian said. "Take your men, walk out the front door, drive back to Columbus." He paused. "I'm telling you once. You know who I am. You know what once means." Daniel knew. Every person in the room knew. He looked at Emily one more time. She held his gaze and did not look away and did not say anything because she had already said what needed to be said, and there was nothing left to add to it. He turned. He walked to the door. His men went with him. The door closed. The bar held its breath. Then Sophia reached under the counter and pulled out 3 glasses and a bottle and poured without being asked. And one of the evening regulars, a man named Hector, who had been coming in every Thursday for years, and who had watched the entire thing with the dignified attention of a man who knows he is seeing something important, raised his glass slightly and said to no one in particular, "Good." Emily let out a breath. It left her body in a way that felt physical, the leaving of it, as if she had been holding something dense and heavy in her lungs for the entire duration of the last 2 years. And it had finally released. Her hands were shaking. She put them flat on the bar counter, felt the wood, solid, real, present. Sophia put a glass in front of her. "Drink," she said. Emily drank. Adrian came to the bar and stood beside her, not close, not touching, just present in the way that he was always present, the steady, reliable point of reference. "He'll comply," he said. "He understands the situation." "How do you know?" she said. "Because he's a calculating man, and he just ran the calculation," Adrian said. "He lost this one. Men like him absorb that and find a different target. It's not courage, it's math." She looked at him. "That's a very honest thing to say," she said. "You prefer honest," he said. "I do," she said. "More than almost anything." He looked at her. And in his face, she saw the thing she had been slowly identifying over 5 weeks of watching him be exactly who he was in every situation. The consistency, the weight of him, the particular quality of a man who had built something real in the world, and didn't need you to confirm it. "You were right about the approach," he said. "You were right about using your ground." She shook her head slightly. We were right. It needed both. He considered that. Yes, he said. It did. They stood together at the bar. Outside, Ravenport was doing what Ravenport did the city. Going about its ordinary business. The streets full of people who hadn't just watched a woman stand in front of the thing that had taken 2 years of her life and take it back. But inside the Black Rose, something had settled. Not an ending. She knew enough to know it wasn't an ending. Daniel Cross would go back to Columbus, and she would carry the marks of those 2 years for a long time, because that was how it worked, because you didn't get the years back. And healing wasn't a door you walked through, cleanly on the other side of a confrontation. It was slow, it was daily, it was work. But something had settled. She was not preparing to leave. She was preparing to stay. And the difference between those two things she understood now with her whole body was the difference between surviving and living. She picked up the glass. She finished what was in it. Then she straightened, and she reached under the counter for the restocking cloth, and she went back to work. Because there was always work, and the work was hers. 3 days after Daniel walked out of the Black Rose, Emily stopped waiting for him to come back. This was harder than it sounded. She had spent 2 years inside the rhythm of his returns, the cycle of tension and release, the way things would escalate. And then he would walk back in with the pleasant face and the reasonable voice, and the implicit suggestion that the previous version of events had been a misunderstanding, had been an overreaction, had been her dramatic streak, running ahead of her judgment. The cycle had its own gravity. Even now, 3 days out from watching him turn and walk through that door, some part of her was still listening for his footsteps, still braced for the moment the pattern completed itself. But the footsteps didn't come. Adrian had been right about the math. Daniel was a calculating man, and the calculation he had run in the Black Rose had produced a clear result. Ravenport was not a city where his tools worked. The money, the private investigator, the quiet intimidation, the 2 men standing at the door, all of it had run up against something it couldn't move. And Daniel was not a man who wasted resources on immovable things. He found other targets. He always had. Emily understood this and felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Not relief. Not yet. Something more complicated. She felt the grief of it. Not grief for Daniel. She needed to be honest with herself about that. She felt no grief for Daniel. She felt the clear and uncomplicated absence of a thing that had been causing her damage. But grief for the 2 years. For the woman who had given those years, who had spent them negotiating with a reality that was being managed for her, who had handed over so much: her money, her friends, her confidence, her mornings, her sense of what she was capable of, and would not get any of it back. Not in the form it had existed before he had it. You didn't get the years back. She knew that. She had always known that in an abstract way. But the knowing landed differently now that the danger had passed, and there was nothing left to focus on except what remained. She was in the apartment above the bar on a Thursday morning, the 4th morning after Daniel left, when she let herself actually feel it. She sat at the table with her coffee and her notebook, and she let the grief come up in her, the way grief has to, without the editing and the management she had applied to every emotion for 2 years, and she cried for a while, not dramatically, not with the full-body devastation of a woman in crisis, just the quiet, private crying of someone grieving something real, letting the weight of it be its actual weight, rather than the compressed version she had been carrying. She cried for the version of herself she'd been at 27, who had looked at Daniel Cross and felt chosen. She cried for Carla, who she had drifted away from, and who she didn't know how to find. She cried for the business degree she hadn't finished, for the classes she had been taking online, before Daniel found reasons why they were taking too much of her time. She cried for the specific ordinary losses, the autonomy over small things, the right to spend an afternoon, how she wanted the ability to have a bad day without having to account for what had caused it and whether it was somehow a failing. She cried until she was done. Then she wiped her face and picked up her coffee and opened the notebook. She turned to a new page. At the top she wrote, "What comes next?" And for the first time in the entire notebook, the page below that heading did not contain a list of threats and anticipated moves and defensive strategies. It contained something else entirely. She brought the notebook downstairs at noon. Adrian was in the office. She knocked. She always knocked, had always knocked. Because whatever the practical arrangements of the apartment above the bar, the office was his space, and she respected that boundary, the way she respected all the boundaries he maintained, which was fully and without needing them explained. He looked up. "Can I show you something?" she said. He gestured to the chair. She sat. She opened the notebook to the new page and turned it to face him. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at her. "You've been thinking about this for a while," he said. "Since the second week," she said. "I started seeing the inefficiencies in the accounts, and I started thinking about what the bar could be if the supply chain were restructured and the scheduling were rebuilt from the actual data rather than from habit." He looked back at the page. She had written 3 things. The first was a reorganized supply chain that she had modeled based on the purchasing records, a different vendor arrangement, consolidated orders, a projected cost reduction. She had calculated conservatively, which meant the actual number was likely higher. The second was a staffing structure built on the actual pattern of the bar's traffic over 18 months, which was not what the current schedule reflected. The current schedule had been built historically and then adjusted at the edges, but never restructured from the data, and the data showed specific gaps and specific redundancies that the intuition-based schedule couldn't see. The third was something different. Something that was not about efficiency, but about direction. "The third one," Adrian said. "Yes," she said. She had written the Black Rose as a legitimate business operation, not as a front, as a real primary profitable business in its own right. She watched his face while he read it. "The bar makes money," she said. "Not as much as it could because it's been managed as a secondary consideration, as the visible surface of something else. But the location, the clientele, the existing brand recognition in the neighborhood, there's a real business here, one that doesn't need to be a secondary operation." "You're suggesting I pivot," he said. "I'm suggesting the bar can support itself," she said. "What you do with that information is your decision. I'm just telling you what I see." He was quiet for a moment. She had thought about how he would receive this. She had thought about it carefully because this was not a small thing. She was saying she was essentially telling a man who ran an empire that one corner of that empire could be genuinely and cleanly profitable without any connection to the rest of the empire. And there were 100 ways that could land. Wrong could sound like judgment, could sound like the naive optimism of a woman who didn't understand what she was inside of. But she was not naive, and she was not afraid of what she was inside of. Adrian set the notebook down. He looked at her. "You came into this bar 5 weeks ago with $41 and a borrowed name," he said. "And 3/4 and a dime," she said. Something moved in his face. "And you have just handed me a restructuring plan." "I handed you an observation," she said, "and a question. The restructuring plan comes after you answer the question." "What's the question?" She looked at him steadily. "Do you want the bar to be more than it is?" The silence was long, longer than his usual silences. She waited. "Yes," he said. She picked up the notebook. "Then we have work to do," she said. What happened next happened fast, which was the pace Emily had always worked best at. She was discovering not the slow, careful pace of someone who second-guessed every step, but the purposeful speed of someone who had done the thinking in advance and was now executing. The supply chain restructuring took 2 weeks and saved the bar more in the first month than she had projected conservatively, which meant the actual data confirmed what she had suspected. The previous system had been leaking money in small amounts in enough places that the total was significant, and nobody had been watching closely enough to see it. Sophia watched Emily work with an expression that she eventually named as something between satisfaction and vindication. "You're enjoying being right," Emily said one afternoon. "I'm enjoying watching you be right," Sophia said, "which is different. The staffing restructuring was more complicated because it involved people, and people were not data. And Emily knew this, had always known this. The numbers were the map, not the territory. And the territory was made of actual human beings with actual human needs that the data could reflect but couldn't replace. She did it carefully. She had conversations with every person on the floor staff individually about what the schedule data showed and what they actually needed, and she built the new structure from both sources rather than from either one alone. Marco, who had worked the door for 7 years, and who had always worked evenings, because that was what the schedule had always said, mentioned casually in their conversation that he actually preferred afternoons because of his mother who needed someone at home by 8. The old schedule had never asked. The new one fixed it in 20 minutes. He came to find her after seeing the revised schedule. "How did you know?" he said. "I didn't," she said. "I asked." He looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man who has just had a small and significant thing clarified. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for telling me," she said. She thought about that exchange for the rest of the day, thought about what it meant that asking had been surprising, thought about what it meant that a workplace could run for years on the assumption that what people needed was identical to what they had always been given, thought about how long she had lived that way herself. The first twist came on a Friday evening 3 weeks after Daniel left, and it came from the direction she had least expected. She was closing out the accounts for the week, the new system, the clean system, the one that actually told you what was happening in the business, rather than the approximate version of what had happened when her phone rang. Unknown number. She had learned a different relationship with unknown numbers in the last 5 weeks. She still felt the initial spike, the body's memory of what unknown numbers had meant, but she let it pass and answered. "Is this Emily Carter?" A woman's voice. Careful professional. "Who's asking?" "My name is Catherine Briggs. I'm an attorney in Columbus, Ohio. I'm calling on behalf of a civil matter that I believe involves you." Emily went very still. "What matter?" she said. "I represent 3 women who are filing a civil complaint against a Daniel Cross for financial coercion, emotional abuse, and fraud during domestic partnerships," Catherine Briggs said. "During our investigation, your name appeared multiple times in documentation we obtained. We believe you may be the earliest documented case in the pattern." A pause. "I want to be clear that you're under no obligation to participate, but if you're willing to speak with me, your account could be significant to these women's case." Emily sat at the desk. She breathed. 3 women. She was not the only one. She had known in the abstract that men like Daniel did not do what Daniel did. Once that the method was practiced, which meant it had been practiced before, which meant there had been others. She had known this the way you know things that are true and devastating, and that you set aside because you cannot carry them and everything else at the same time. But knowing in the abstract and hearing the word 3 from an attorney's careful professional voice were different things. "Tell me about these women," Emily said. She told Adrian that evening, not because she needed his permission, because she wanted to tell him. Because he had become the person she wanted to tell things to, not out of need or dependency, or the desperate attachment of a woman who had been isolated from every other connection, but the way you want to tell things to someone you trust, because the telling is part of the processing, and trust is what makes it possible. He listened. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "What do you want to do?" he said. "I want to talk to the attorney," she said. "I want to give her everything I have, the notebook, the dates I can remember, the financial documentation I managed to pull together before I left. I have a small amount of it, things I photographed on my phone before I ditched it." She paused. "I want to be part of this." "That means your real name," he said. "On a legal document, attached to a case that Daniel will be aware of." "I know." He'll respond. "I know that too." She met his eyes. "But 3 women, Adrian. 3 women I don't know who are doing this, who are going through what I went through, going through it formally and publicly and on the record. And I am the earliest documented case." She paused. "I can't be a person who had the information that would help them, and chose not to give it, because I was afraid." He looked at her. "You're not afraid," he said. I'm terrified, she said. That's different. The corner of his mouth moved. Yes, he said. It is. She waited. Do you need me to say it's okay? He said. She shook her head. I need you to know what I'm doing, because it involves you tangentially my presence here, what you've done for me, that's going to be part of the picture. He was quiet for a moment. I've had attorneys on retainer for 12 years, he said, for situations considerably more complicated than this one. The bar is a legitimate business. You are a legitimate employee. He paused. Use my attorney for the civil side if you want him. His name is Harris. He's good. She looked at him. You're giving me access to your lawyer, she said. I'm offering, he said. Your decision. She thought about the difference between those two things. Yes, she said. I'll take the introduction. He nodded once. I'll call him in the morning, he said. He turned back to the desk. She stood up. She walked to the door and stopped. Adrian, she said. He looked up. She didn't have the exact right words, so she said the true thing, which was what she had written in the notebook, and what she had decided was the only language worth speaking. I walked into this bar with nothing, she said. And I don't mean that as a debt. I mean it as a fact. I want you to know I'm aware of it, of what this place has been. He looked at her steadily. What this place has been, he said, is better for having you in it. He paused. That's also a fact. She left. She went upstairs. She sat at the table for a long time without turning on the light. She was thinking about Catherine Briggs and 3 women she didn't know. She was thinking about the notebook full of dates and patterns and the specific language Daniel used when he was building a case against your sense of yourself. She was thinking about the fact that what had felt for 2 years like her private failure, her specific personal inability to see what was happening and leave it, was in fact a documented pattern that a lawyer had investigated and was prepared to argue in court. She was not the origin of the pattern. She was the first known instance of it. That distinction mattered in a way she was still learning to articulate. She opened the notebook. She turned to a new page. She wrote, "Tell the true thing." All of it. She called Catherine Briggs the next morning and talked for 2 hours. She gave the attorney everything, the dates she could confirm, the financial control, the pattern of isolation, the specific language, the way it had worked, the mechanism of it. She spoke clearly and without the shame that had previously complicated the telling, because she understood, now had understood, since the 5 in the morning notebook and the 30 seconds of crying she had allowed herself 3 days after Daniel left, that the shame was one of his installations, one of the things he had put in her, and it was not native to her, and she could set it down. She set it down. Harris, Adrian's attorney, sat in on the call in an advisory capacity, and at the end he said, "Your account is the clearest documentation I've seen of this particular behavioral pattern. The attorney is going to want you on record." "I know," Emily said. "It means testimony. Possibly public testimony." "I know." Harris looked at her with the assessment of a man who spent his professional life evaluating whether people were as solid as they presented. "Okay," he said. That afternoon she filed a formal statement. She signed it, Emily Carter. Her real name. Her full name. In ink on a document that would exist in the world, attached to a case that said clearly and publicly what Daniel Cross had done, and to whom and how and for how long. She sat in Harris's office with the pen in her hand for exactly 1 second before she signed it. 1 second. That was all the time the fear needed. Then she signed. The second twist came 6 days later, and it came from Daniel himself. His response to the civil filing was to hire an attorney and file a counter-complaint not against the 3 other women, but against Emily, specifically alleging that she had stolen financial records from his home before leaving and that her claims constituted defamation. Harris called her at 8 in the morning. "He's trying to put you on the defensive," Harris said. Make you spend the next 6 months managing your own exposure instead of contributing to the case against him. It's a delay tactic." "I know," Emily said. "You're remarkably calm," Harris said. "I've had 5 weeks of practice," she said. She told Adrian. He listened. When she finished, he said, "What do you need?" She thought about this question. Really thought about it in the way she was learning to think about it, not the reflexive nothing, "I'm fine," or the paralyzed, "I don't know," but the honest, considered answer. "I need to see Sophia," she said. He nodded. She found Sophia in the bar. She sat on a stool at the counter, the same counter she had stood behind for 5 weeks, seen from the other side, and she told Sophia everything. The civil case Daniel's counterfiling, the fact that her name was now publicly attached to a legal action that was going to be visible. Sophia listened. Then Sophia said, "Do you regret it?" Emily looked at her. "No," she said. Not immediately, not without actually checking. She checked honestly and fully, the way she was learning to check her own interior states without filtering them first. "No, I don't regret it." "Then you know what to do," Sophia said. "Keep going," Emily said. "Keep going," Sophia confirmed. She poured 2 coffees. They sat on the same side of the counter for the first time, the two of them, and they drank their coffee while the bar prepared itself for another evening. Chati. The case moved faster than Emily expected. Daniel's counter-complaint was dismissed within 3 weeks on the grounds that the documents Emily had photographed were financial records to which she was a named party, not proprietary business records, and that her testimony in a civil matter was legally protected speech. Harris explained this to her in a phone call that lasted 4 minutes, with the particular brevity of a man delivering good news. The civil case against Daniel continued. Emily gave formal testimony in November. She sat across a conference table from Daniel's attorney and answered questions for 3 hours. Daniel was not in the room. He was in a different room, which was standard procedure and also a mercy she was grateful for, because she did not know how many times she could stand in front of his face and hold herself together before the effort accumulated to something she couldn't carry. But in the room she was in, she held herself completely together. Afterward, Catherine Briggs walked with her to the elevator and said, "You were extraordinary in there." Emily shook her head. "I just told the truth." "That's what extraordinary looks like in that room," Catherine said. Emily thought about that on the drive back to Ravenport, thought about what it meant that telling the true thing was considered extraordinary. Thought about how many people spent how much of their time not telling it, not for malicious reasons, but for all the ordinary human reasons. The fear of exposure, the exhaustion of accuracy, the way the truth had weight that a simpler version didn't. She was done with the simpler version. She got back to Ravenport at 7 in the evening. She walked into the Black Rose through the back door, and she stood in the hallway for a moment and just listened. The bar was moving. She could hear it, the layered sound of an evening in full rhythm, voices and music, and the reliable clatter of a room full of people choosing to be somewhere together. She had built some of what made this room work. The scheduling, the supply chain, the staffing structure that put the right people in the right positions at the right times. She could hear the results of that work in the sound of the room. She walked in. Sophia saw her first. The expression on Sophia's face lasted half a second before she controlled it, but Emily caught it, the specific, unguarded relief of a person who has been waiting for someone to come back and is now watching them come through the door. "Good," Sophia said. "Good," Emily said. She tied on her apron. She went to work. Adrian found her at 9:30. Not unusual. He appeared in the evenings the way he always had, the end of the bar. The glass of water, the steady attention of a man watching something that was his. But tonight, he came to where she was working, rather than waiting for her to come to him, and she noticed the difference and filed it. "How did it go?" he said. "I told the truth for 3 hours," she said. "It was the most exhausting thing I've done in 5 weeks." "But you did it." "But I did it," she said. He looked at her. There was something in his face tonight that she had been tracking for weeks, a quality she didn't have precise language for, yet something that had been present in small degrees since the night he had told her she wasn't leaving, and had grown incrementally with each week, with each account review each morning when she knocked on the office door and he looked up with the particular expression that he reserved for her arrival. The one that was different from his expression when anyone else arrived, though she thought he didn't know. She had noticed. She had noticed. She had been noticing for a long time. "I want to ask you something," he said. She waited. "The third item in the notebook," he said. "The restructuring proposal. The bar as a primary operation." "Yes," she said. "I've been thinking about it since you showed it to me," he said. "About what it would require, what it would mean." "What did you decide?" she said. He looked at her steadily. "It would require someone who understands both the business and the environment," he said. "Someone who can manage the civilian side without needing to be separated from the reality of the rest of it." He paused. "Someone I trust with both." She looked at him. "Are you offering me a job?" she said. "I'm offering you a partnership," he said. "The bar, the legitimate operation, your structure, your management, your decision-making on the business side." He paused. "It's yours if you want it." The offer landed in the space between them, and she let it sit there without rushing to respond. She thought about the woman who had walked into this bar 7 weeks ago. The woman with $41 and a borrowed name, and 2 years of someone else's version of herself installed in her like a virus. The woman who had stood at this same counter and offered a trial shift because she had no other options and was trying not to let that show. She thought about what that woman would have done with an offer like this. She thought about what this woman, the one standing here now, the one who had built the accounts and restructured the supply chain and stood in front of Daniel Cross and said, "You never owned me," and walked into a conference room and told the truth for 3 hours and signed her real name to a document that existed in the world. What this woman wanted. "I want it," she said, "but I want something else too." He waited. "I want it to be real," she said, "not a courtesy, not something you're offering because you feel like you owe me, or because this is how your world handles people it wants to keep close. I want it because the work I've done here is worth the offer. On those terms." "On those terms," he said without hesitation. "The work you've done here is worth more than the offer." She looked at him. "Then yes," she said. He extended his hand. She shook it. His hand was warm, and his grip was firm, and he held it exactly long enough to mean something, and not 1 second longer. "Welcome," he said. She felt the word in her chest. Not gratitude. Belonging. Different things. She let go of his hand and turned back to the bar. Kent. The months that followed were the clearest months of Emily Carter's life. The civil case settled in February. The settlement was private, which meant she couldn't discuss the terms, but Catherine Briggs called her the morning it was signed and said, "The 3 women want you to know that your testimony was the foundation of the case. Without the documentation you provided, they would have had 3 separate stories. With it, they had a pattern, and patterns are what courts can act on." Emily sat with the phone at the table in the apartment above the Black Rose and said, "Are they okay?" "They're better," Catherine said. "Better is what we can do." "Better is enough," Emily said. She meant it. She hung up and sat for a moment. She thought about Daniel Cross signing a settlement document somewhere in Columbus and what that meant. Not for her. She was done organizing her life around what things meant for him, but for the 3 women she had never met, and whose names she didn't know, and who were somewhere today, beginning the particular difficult daily work of rebuilding. She hoped they had someone who handed them a key. She hoped they had someone who asked if they were okay, and then waited for the real answer. She hoped they found the thing she had found in this city, in this bar, in the slow accumulation of 5 weeks that had turned into months, the understanding that the person who saves you is you, and what other people can do is provide the conditions in which you remember that. She opened her notebook. She turned to the last written page. She had written, "What comes next?" at the top of it 7 weeks ago, and below that heading, she had written the 3 items that had become the restructuring proposal, and then the bar partnership, and then the testimony, and then the settlement. She turned to the next blank page. She wrote, "Now." Then she closed the notebook. She put it in the drawer. She went downstairs. The Black Rose on a Thursday evening in March was the best version of itself. The scheduling restructuring had done what the data said it would do, the right people at the right times, the floor moving efficiently, the room having the quality of a place that knows what it is and does it well. The supply chain changes had freed up margin that Emily had reinvested in the kind of small specific improvements that customers couldn't name, but felt better quality in 3 key products. A lighting adjustment that had taken her 2 weeks to convince Sophia about, and that Sophia had ultimately admitted was correct. A menu of bar snacks that were genuine, rather than obligatory, sourced from 2 local vendors she had found through the purchasing data. Hector was at his Thursday table. He raised his glass slightly when she passed. She raised a hand back. Marco was at the door home by 8, his mother at home with someone to be there. Sophia was behind the bar with the expression she wore when the room was working. Right, not happy exactly. Sophia didn't do happy in the obvious register, but satisfied the deep professional satisfaction of a person in complete mastery of their environment. And Adrian was at the end of the bar. Glass of water. The steady attention. She came to his end of the counter during a lull. She didn't say anything. He looked at her. "The March numbers are going to be good," she said. "I know," he said. "I've seen what you've been building." "You've been watching," she said. "Always," he said. She looked at him. At the dark gray eyes that cataloged and assessed, and she understood now cared in the particular private, non-performative way that he did everything. She thought about the first time she had stood in front of this man and given a false name and asked for a trial shift. She thought about the way he had said 4 hours and gone back through the door, and she had thought, what kind of man is this? She knew now. He was the kind of man who gave you space to do it yourself, who handed you the books without asking what you'd find, who said you're not leaving and meant you didn't have to, who showed up when the door closed with his people and his weight and his absolute refusal to let a man with 2 hired hands walk out of his bar with a woman who had chosen to stay, who extended his hand and said welcome and meant exactly what it sounded like. "I want to tell you something," she said. He waited. "The night I walked in here," she said, "I had already decided it was the last stop. Not in a dark way." She needed him to understand that. "I mean, I had decided if this didn't work, I didn't have a next move planned. I had used everything I had to get here, and I was standing on empty." He was very still. "And you gave me 4 hours," she said. "You didn't ask why I was here, or where I'd come from, or why I looked the way I looked. You just gave me 4 hours and let the work speak." She paused. "I don't think you know how much that was." He looked at her for a long moment. "I think I do," he said. She shook her head. "You gave it without knowing what it meant to me. That's different from knowing." He considered that. "You're right," he said. They looked at each other. In the bar around them, the Thursday evening continued its course. The reliable human business of people gathering in a place that felt like itself, that had been made better and truer by the specific work of 2 specific people who had neither of them expected to find the other. "I'm staying," she said. "I want you to know that, not because I have nowhere else to go. I have options now. I built them." She held his gaze. "I'm staying because I want to be here, because this is mine, and I built it, and it's real." Adrian Voss looked at Emily Carter across the bar that she had walked into with $41 and a borrowed name and 2 years of someone else's damage installed in her bones. He looked at her the way he had looked at her spreadsheet on that first afternoon for the exact right amount of time without modifying what he saw. Then he said, "I know." 2 words. Present tense. No modification. She turned back to the bar and went back to work, and the room continued its course. And outside Ravenport moved through its Thursday the way cities move indifferently, continuously, without regard for what was happening inside any particular set of walls. But inside the black rose, something had been built that was not going to come apart. Not because it was protected by the right man, or reinforced by the right resources, or shielded by the right network of people who would stand at a door when it needed standing at, but because it had been built by a woman who finally understood the only truth that had ever mattered. She had not been broken. She had been buried. And there is a significant difference between those two things, because broken things cannot be restored, but buried things given light and space, and the simple radical act of being allowed to grow in the direction they were always meant to grow, come back stronger than they were before, with roots deep enough that no one will ever pull them out again. Emily Carter had come back, and she was never going anywhere.